this is We'll Shift Dust, a Silo TV podcast, back with your breakdown of Silo, Apple TV Plus's sci-fi thriller based on the books by Hugh Howey. We are your hosts, Elysia Brenner and
Luke Middock.
And we are your Flamekeepers this week, revealing all the secret histories. This is your official spoiler warning. We will be discussing episode 7 of Silo and everything leading up to it, and I will be discussing the equivalent parts of the books, but probably, definitely a bit less this week because we're going pretty far off book in this episode. But don't worry, I won't be spoiling any of the twists and turns to come. We aren't watching ahead, and I want to make sure that Luke and any listeners at home who are new to the story experience all the reveals fresh in real time. And honestly, with the show building out the world of the book so much, I often don't even know what's coming yet either. Luke, what were your overall thoughts about this week's episode? Did you like it?
Well, firstly, kudos to you, Elysia, because you were absolutely right about what the Flamekeepers were. You were using a bit of inside Potawatomi knowledge there to figure out that the Flamekeepers are the keepers of the true history of the Silo. I think we found out that...
But I didn't expect it to be Gloria.
But you didn't expect it to be Loria. Okay, so partial credit there, partial kudos. I think we found out that the rebellion probably happened in some form or other, because when Gloria was talking to Juliet, she's sort of describing the events that it sounded to me like she was describing the events that led up to the rebellion. So we've been wondering whether or not that was apocryphal. I think this episode sort of tilts me towards thinking that something happened. Yeah.
Okay.
We know that Sims was the man that was woken up in the middle of the night last episode.
I was totally wrong there, and I think a bunch of book reader heads imploded at this information.
Yeah, so that leads to a whole bunch of questions, but we'll get there. We'll get there when we get there. Overall, I like the episode. It did very much feel like an episode where, characters and plot points were being moved into place.
Right.
For sort of the final 3 episodes of the season. It did feel like this was an episode in which sort of the storylines were shifting, so we're getting everything in place for the final 3 episodes.
Yeah, I didn't love this one as much as last week's, and I think that had a lot to do with like the directing felt a little rougher, less cohesive to me for some reason, but I loved the story and the reveals. Like I said, I noticed this is one that's dividing book fans as it goes even further from the books in some ways, but it also brings in some ideas from later in the series. So yeah, there's a lot of people having a lot of feelings about that, understandably. For example, this was the first week when I didn't have any passages from the book that I wanted to read. The bits I would most want to read, based on what we learned in this episode, I would consider spoilery because they come from later in the series and refer to other things. So yeah, we're pretty much completely off book this week, and I don't mind it as a viewer. I love that they're keeping me guessing, even though I generally know where things are going. Yeah, I can tell from the rest of the season we'll be back into the book plot, and I'm so excited to see new fan reactions. Luke, seems like most non-readers are quite happy with this week's episode, with all the reveals, and even though they're not the ones book readers are waiting for. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly moved a lot of things forward. I'm glad we got the payoff as to who the guy they were waking up was. I'm glad they didn't sort of tease us for the remainder of the series with that. I think there are a lot of questions around that being Sims and what that means. And of course, we see Daddy Dearest Dr. Nichols, Ian Glenn, back again. And seeing as Silo is making a habit of killing off its characters, I have to say, I would give Dr. Nichols very short odds on making it. I was going to say making it to the end of the series, but actually probably making it to the end of episode 8, if I'm honest.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. All right. Predictions coming hard and fast. Yeah, I think, I have a lot of predictions that I'm not going to share for the last 3 episodes, but I think that they're lining up like the big reveals that book readers have been waiting all season for, and they're just going to like knock them down like dominoes through the rest of the season and beyond.
Okay.
But yeah, shall we dive into the many juicy reveals from this episode?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we're going to get into that right after a quick commercial break.
Your regularly scheduled breakdown will begin in 3, 2, 1.
This week's episode, the seventh of the first season, was called The Flamekeepers. Now, yeah, we talked a little bit about what that turned out meaning, and obviously, we're going to be getting into all of Gloria's reveals. This episode was directed by Bert and Birdie again, the same female directing duo I was raving about last week. So I don't know why the directing felt off to me. I think maybe because the comedic side wasn't there this time. You were saying it's a transition episode. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think they had a lot of character building and a lot of plot to get through in this hour. So I think the fact that the comedy wasn't there, I think that's just a function of we have to get from point A to point B to point
right.
C to point D in this episode. So we've got to kind of strip everything out and keep it kind of focused.
Yeah, that's probably what it is for me because last week I was just enjoying them so much, like leaning into the characters. But I know other people find that too slow. So hopefully they're happier with this one. Was definitely faster paced, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I've never had a problem with the pacing of the show, and I know people in the Discord and people we got feedback from have issues with it. But I think that if it is maybe a little slow at points, I think that's to do with the fact that this is season one of a new series, and if you're going to do this kind of fairly hard sci-fi successfully, then you do have to do quite a bit of world building and work out the rules
Right,
of engagement and let the audience know what the logic of or the sort of logics of the world you're building are, so that then in later seasons the audience knows where it is, knows where the characters are, knows what's possible and what's not possible in
right,
the confines of this world. So I think it's just, to be honest, I've always just taken the way it's paced as this is the first season of at least a 3-season show, and the showrunners are just getting the audience acclimatized to the world of the silo.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, and they're definitely broadening the world building for the show versus the book, where I mean, there's a lot of world building in it, but it's more plot driven, with the world building just feeding into the plot driving forward.
Mm. There was one nice scene. It wasn't quite comedic, but I thought it was quite sweet with Billings' wife bringing him his lunch.
Yeah, definitely.
He'd forgotten his lunch. Yeah.
Yeah, they're sweet together. Yeah. And so credit for that and writing the rest of the episode goes to Jessica Bear, who's also done writing for other shows like Sneaky Pete, Masters of Sex, and Becoming a God in Central Florida, none of which I've seen, but all of which I want to see. Especially Becoming a God in Central Florida. I've heard a lot of good things.
Yeah, have to watch any show called Becoming a God in Central Florida. That's just an elevator pitch for the ages.
That's just good marketing. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, we'll obviously be getting into the many big reveals this episode, but we already open with the woman who drops most of them, Gloria Hildebrand, played by Sophie Thompson, who I just found out yesterday is actually Emma Thompson's sister.
Okay, I was going to try and act surprised, but the fact is, this is the second time we're recording this now. Just take my word for it. I was surprised the first time.
It's true. I can vouch for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a fertility counselor who told Allison in the first episode that the doctors weren't really taking out the birth control for curious, less docile women like them, who we now know she's also George's aunt and the previous owner of the Georgia guidebook for kids that's now in Juliet's possession. We see Gloria in what seems to be a waking dream on a beach with the husband she lost when she couldn't have kids and the child they were never allowed to have together. She wishes that she could hear and smell what it's really like to be on the beach, but all she knows is what she saw in that guidebook. So we see her surrounded by images from the book, even fingering one of the ammonite shell fossils from the pages, the same George got tattooed on himself. But everything, like the lighting, the glassiness of the ammonite, it all feels a bit off. What do you think's happening here, Luke?
Yeah, so you did a crossover with John and David from the Lorehounds, and they were talking about all the other shows it reminded them of, and one of the shows that came up was Westworld, and they were talking about that in the context of the opening credits. But this particular scene reminded me of any number of scenes from season 1 and 2 of Westworld when Maeve was having flashbacks of her life with her daughter, in that it's all everything we see is in Gloria's imagination. None of this is coherent. None of this actually happened to her in this lifetime. So it's all sort of an internal, idealized version
Right.
of something that never happened. And there's a quality to the way that scene is shot where it's not a beach, it's somebody's imagination of what a beach would look like
Right.
based on a picture, based on a
Mhm.
2D image. I thought that was actually really well done because the scene telegraphs that yes, it is a beach, but it does get across in the visual language that it's not a real beach, it's not a memory. It's
Right.
not a memory that Gloria is having.
A
It's
fantasy.
purely yeah, it's a fantasy. It's pure imagination. To quote Willy Wonka.
Yeah. And her pure imagination is interrupted by a rude nurse named Amy, played by Jacqueline Berses, who walks in, interrupting the scene to give Gloria a syringe full of something shady. But we see that Gloria is in some sort of long term care facility, disconnected from reality, raving about how she wants to get back to her daydream of the beach. Now, if you pause later, you can see that the drug she's being given is lorazepam. And I'm just going to quote Wikipedia here because a few things stood out to me in the list of treatments. Lorazepam, sold under the brand name Ativan, among others, is a benzodiazepine medication used to treat anxiety disorders, trouble sleeping, severe agitation, active seizures, including status epilepticus, alcohol withdrawal, and chemotherapy induced nausea and vomiting. It is also used during surgery to interfere with memory formation and to sedate those who are being mechanically ventilated. Does anything there stand out to you as well, Luke?
Well, it's definitely being used as a sedative in this context, and the fact that it blocks memory formation
Very interesting.
is interesting as well. There are two things that stood out to me in this scene. One is, why are they keeping Gloria alive? Like, if she is as dangerous to the janitors as they seem to think she is, why did she not meet with an untimely accident or a convenient heart attack or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think there may be the silos may be slightly less sinister than the picture in your mind because I think even when they do kill people, they do it because they think they have no other choice. Except Trumbull, he messed up and that's why he had to die. But they don't want to cause unrest. They want to keep things peaceful and calm. They're not just like being evil for the sake of being evil. And if they can just shut Gloria up with some lorazepam in a back room, then why not just go for that solution?
Yeah, I guess. And I get that the janitors can't just be going around killing people off. But Gloria and the whole concept of the Flamekeepers does seem like exceptionally dangerous to what the janitors are trying to do. And they clearly do have a degree of ruthlessness. So my money is still on they need her alive for some reason we're not aware of yet.
Okay. Okay.
And the other thing that was interesting is that the silo provides like long term palliative care because I'd kind of assumed that maybe it was kind of that there was a maybe a sort of Logan's Run type situation going on in
As
the
long as
silo.
it's not Soylent Green, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what Logan's Run type situation going on in the silo, where if you had some kind of where once you'd reached a certain age and if you had some kind of incurable illness, they would just sort of, come along in the night and give you a shot or something. But clearly that's not what's happening.
No, I mean, I know that comes out of the Nazi playbook, but we've seen a lot of elderly people, and we saw Juliet's brother. He clearly had some ongoing illness, and I don't see the Nichols ever surrendering him. I
That
think
that's true. That's true.
I think it again comes down to what just keeps people docile and happy, and it's not killing grandma in general.
Yeah, that is true. But I still think it's interesting that the silo that takes such care over population management has the idea of like long term palliative care. I thought that was interesting.
Hmm. Um, so the last thing Gloria says in this scene after she gets stuck with the lorazepam is, "I have to find them." What do you think she means by them? Do you think like her imaginary family, relics, George?
Any and all of the above. It might well be some combination of all of that because she wasn't just hallucinating anything. She was hallucinating something from that book.
Right,
So however much they've tried to mess with her memory, she still remembers that book.
right,
She still on some level remembers who the Flamekeepers are and that she's a member of them.
right.
So I think it's probably some combination of reality and fantasy at that point.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and we then cut to Juliet looking at exactly that beach page of the book in question. She then opens to the front cover, and we see the names of the previous owners of the book written in them, like we used to write our names in books in grade school. Which kind of strikes me as really cheeky, considering this is a highly illegal relic, and you're just putting your name in it. Like, yeah, no, I definitely owned that at one point.
Yeah, that is a good point. Although maybe this is the Silo's like version of present tats,
Yeah,
sort of gang membership or something.
yeah, I'm badass. I got my name in a
I
relic.
got my name in a book.
There's pictures of outside. You can't even handle this book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I don't think Juliet. I think Juliet probably, well, not probably. Juliet certainly came up to be sheriff to solve George Wilkins's murder, and that's still the main thing that's driving her. But I think we're now starting to get Juliet being more interested in the bigger mystery of the silo.
Right. And I think we have people like George to credit for that.
Yeah.
Speaking of whom, yeah, I think that the reason they write the names in the book from like considering the viewer's perspective is just probably to like remind us of the chain of possession of this book. And also maybe there's an Easter egg hidden in there. So on the right side, we see the most recent owners' names. So these are people we know: Gloria, Anne, who would be George's mom then, and George. But on the left side, we see previous owners, and these are new names to us. The top one is hard to read, but looks like something like Blau T. And then the other ones are Amelia C, OBJ, and Melody. And Amelia C is underlined, drawing the eye to it. And people are speculating online that the C might stand for crow, a name that should mean something to book readers, but we'll have to wait a while to find out if there's anything to that.
Okay.
And then we see Juliet, Rebecca Ferguson, by the way, who she pulls George's file out of the oven to remind viewers that Gloria was interviewed about her nephew's relic collecting before his death. Luke, I'm guessing that oven doesn't get much use.
No, I'm guessing Juliet likes some takeout. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think we've seen Juliet eat the entire season.
Well, we know she doesn't like mushrooms, so
Well, yeah, we know
there's
she doesn't
that.
like. We know she doesn't like mushrooms.
Girl after my own heart. Yeah. But do you think Holston did any cooking after Allison died?
No, and again, I'm guessing Holston ate all his meals in the cafeteria, so that oven
Yeah.
probably hasn't been used in a good long while.
Yeah. Might as well put files in
Yeah,
there.
might as well.
But as Juliet's about to dash out the door to go look Gloria up, she finally notices that the flowers have been laid down in front of the mirror and the vase is gone. When she gets to the sheriff's station, she gets a message that maintenance apologizes for breaking her vase and is getting it repaired. Juliet is understandably freaked out, wondering why they were in her apartment in the first place, though Bernard, Tim Robbins, warned her before, and Billings, Chinaza Uche, warns her again this episode that maintenance doesn't like when people get in the way of what they deem to be their work.
We don't question maintenance, or all of a
Yeah.
sudden your toilet stops working.
I mean, what do you think the deal with maintenance is? They must work for janitorial, right?
I'm guessing so at this point. I do like Juliet's comeback with that in mechanical. We just fix it.
Just fix it ourselves.
We just fix it ourselves. And actually, that is interesting because does that imply that maintenance only works so far, like down in the silo? Is there a point at which?
I mean, I think in the down
Yeah,
deep, there's just less oversight in general, you know? You
yeah,
got loosey-goosey Deputy Hank and,
yeah,
people kind of take care of themselves and the
yeah.
machines.
Like increasingly, it does seem like the down deep is its own little world within the
Yeah.
silo.
If it were
Yeah,
Star Wars, the down deep would be the Outer Rim.
yeah, exactly.
It's the Wild West of the silo, yeah.
It would be Tatooine. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do hope that there's more clarity coming on how these groups fit together, though. Like, I assumed that our painter Patrick Kennedy was part of maintenance, but is he? I guess not. Would that mean anything if he were? Would that mean that he knew anything? Like, and the guy who opened Trumbull's apartment last episode to be searched, he was credited as a custodian. So where does that fit into the bigger
Yeah,
picture? I have questions.
they're being exceptionally specific with the language they're
Yeah.
using to describe these people, and there has to be a reason for that.
Yeah, which I find interesting because, like, I've been reading tweets on Twitter and, also, like, read tweets in French or Spanish or something, and they'll use the word concierge, which is kind of more general. It doesn't have that nuance of separation. So I'm wondering how they're translating this stuff in the subtitles for people.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. But back on the other side of the camera, in the secret surveillance room, the Watchers, played by Brendan Howley and Aki Kotabi, we see them again. The latter, his character is actually named Diego at one point, and he's the guy who keeps narrating things that other people in the room can already see, like she's taking it with her, and later she's blocked our view, which has been generating really fun Captain Obvious memes on Twitter, so he can stay.
Yeah, and it's Sims.
And that's the big reveal. It is Sims Common. And this is indeed what is inside the janitorial door. So I was not expecting that. Luke, were you happy with this reveal?
I don't know. I think I'm going to have to see what happens next before I can tell you whether I was happy with it. It does raise a lot of questions. So going back to episode 6, like if Sims had access to this, why was he doing like the computer
Right.
search for the pets? Why was he looking through those books? Why didn't he instantly know that that Juliet had planted the Pez dispenser? Because you would think that Doug Trumbull's apartment, like any apartment of anybody in judicial, would certainly have a camera in it. I mean,
Yeah.
they do talk later in the episode that they only have a limited number of cameras and they have to keep moving them. But you would have thought that everybody involved with judicial would be
But
watched.
But if Doug died and they've been moving around cameras, it's possible they took it away. But it's also possible that Sims did see that, but he didn't know how she got the thing, how she got the Pez dispenser. So he had to go look up like the chain of ownership of it, because then he could make the connection with George that he could actually say out loud to accuse her. So I was thinking that's one possibility.
Yeah, maybe,
And the
but
other thing I was thinking is, like, one of the main reasons I thought it couldn't be Sims, in the room with the Watchers when they were waking up is because the tech we saw him using in the last episode was the older tech everyone else has, not the shiny machines we see in this room. So
yeah.
I'm thinking that that means that janitorial is not working for judicial because those old machines were in his judicial
Yeah,
office.
yeah. No, I think the janitors are a completely separate organization unto themselves. Because we'll talk about this when we get there. But I think pretty much confirms that in her conversation with Juliet. Now, I think we know that Sims is the guy that he sent for. That Sims is the guy in the room. But I'm not convinced that that means that Sims is in charge of the janitors. I don't know whether he's Palpatine or Darth Vader at this point. Because I don't know about you, Elysia, but like Sims comes across as being really rattled in this episode.
Okay, yeah.
Like, yeah, he every time we've seen Sims so far in the series, he's been the guy in control. He's been sort of very closed, very sort of quiet, very menacing, very much, that he's in charge of the situation. And Sim seems rattled in this episode, and I think a little bit afraid because he's constantly barking orders at Diego and the other techs. He is like frustrated. There's a building anger in Sims throughout the episode.
Hmm.
If Sims is the ultimate big bad here, like I can see him getting frustrated with the situation, but I think there was fear as well, and that means he's afraid of somebody or something. So
So if he's Vader, who do you think is Palps?
I still think there is somebody else out there that we
Okay, so
haven't met
somebody we
yet.
haven't met yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so back in her office, Juliet is looking up Gloria, and it's confirmed that she's in long-term care. So Juliet's going to, of course, go barging right in there, even though Bernard has demanded an audience with her first thing. And Juliet is openly keeping more secrets from Billing, which we know that he loves. And yeah, Billings reminds us that things are a little on edge after Forgiveness Day. But Juliet blows him off. And just as Deputy Karen's Angela Yo, the other deputy who searched Trumbull's apartment last week and the one who was present when George was interviewed, she's radioing in. We see her also later. So they're keeping her in our minds for some reason, although not much happened with her this week. Now, as Juliet heads down the stairs to the mids to find Gloria, there's also a guy on the stairs working on some steaming pipes who seems to be staring Juliet down. What do you think this was? Do you think it was a maintenance guy, a listener? Are there even listeners at all, or just watchers?
I think they're probably that's a good question. I think there probably are listeners because, like I say, we've established that the janitors can't keep like round the clock surveillance of the entire silo because there aren't enough cameras. So they probably do need the listeners there as kind of backup and to cover the blind spots in the silo. Yeah, I mean, The camera lingered on that guy, so it was clearly intended that we noticed that that guy was giving that guy
Right.
was staring her down. So yeah, I definitely think judicial or the janitors or somebody is sort of tracking Juliet's movements through the silo as comprehensively as they can.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's just, it's probably not someone we'll see again, perhaps, but just to remind us that people are always watching Juliet.
Yeah. And just to go back to something I think I said in the episode 4 podcast, the episode where Juliet gets made sheriff. This is where you see the tension between Juliet's motive for taking the job and the actual job itself. Because she's not really interested in being sheriff. She's
Right.
just interested in finding out what happened to George.
She's interested in the access being sheriff
Yeah, the
provides.
access being sheriff gives her. So, like, poor Billings is having to do, like, his job
Yeah,
and, like,
and hers, yeah.
two-thirds of hers as well, and it doesn't go well. And, like, there's a bit later on in the episode where they have a set to, and, like, yeah, I was with Billings in that argument.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I'm with you, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, no, he claps back finally, but yeah.
yeah.
Um, but first, yeah, downstairs, Nurse Amy is being all kinds of unhelpful when Juliet shows up until she flashes her badge. It's actually not her badge because she forgot to wear it. It's Holston's badge that she has to dig out of her pocket. So I guess we're supposed to understand that she's still not feeling comfortable in her role as sheriff. And then we see them walking past other older women who look equally out of it. And Juliet learns that Gloria has been diagnosed with advanced vascular dementia, which is dementia brought on by a shortage of blood flow to the brain. And it can be caused by strokes, but also other things. Now, I think most viewers called bullshit in that immediately. You, Luke?
Yeah,
Why do you think they specifically called it vascular dementia?
I don't know, just because I think somebody had looked it up on, like, medical
Yeah.
Wikipedia and thought, "Well, why not?"
Sure. Be specific.
Yeah, I know this thing, but let's put in a bit of
Yeah.
specificity because I don't think that fooled anybody for a second.
Yeah.
And like the nurse, I actually really like this thing because the nurse is coming up with all sorts of reasons why Juliet can't see Gloria, and
Right.
Juliet is like, "No, bitch, I'm sheriff.
Oh, yeah.
Just bull through the
This
like,
is that access we were talking about.
yeah."
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, and then when Nurse Amy, finally gives in, it's like, well, I don't think you're gonna find out what you want to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is fair. Yeah.
which is fair.
Um, yeah. But Gloria, she now declares when Juliet walks in that she has found them. So presumably the same them as earlier. So, and she says, right where I left them by the water. And she says later, the water they don't want us to know about. Now, I think we're supposed to think she means her daydream family at her daydream beach in the book that's illegal. But I couldn't help but wonder if it was something else. Like, I almost wondered if she'd been down to the digger room with George. I even thought for a second when Juliet said they were going to take a walk that she meant all the way down to the digger room. But then I realized I was letting my brain go off on a tangent that probably wasn't supposed to.
Ah, well, they do talk about the water later on, when after Gloria sort of comes to a bit. So maybe I took it that was the water.
Oh, right. Right. The water that they've been fed. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good point. Good point. But right next to the water they don't want us to know about? What does that mean?
yeah, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but of course, Gloria, she's not allowed to go out on walks unless it's cleared by, you guessed it, Judge Meadows. And the nurse kicks Jules out. Back in the sheriff's station, we get that scene with Paul and his wife, Kathleen, that you brought up earlier. Kathleen played by Caitlin Zaz. And she turns up with his lunch and just to like be adorable for a second. And she's got a sling strapped to her chest. It's supposed to suggest there's a sleeping baby in there, but there's definitely no baby in there.
yeah.
Luke, where do you rank these two in terms of couples we've seen so far in the show?
I just hope they make it to the end of the series. Otherwise, like the rest of the Silence, I might riot because I just need one functioning couple to make it in this series. Because so far, every time people are paired off in this series, one or both of them has died.
Yeah, it's funny because Hugh Howey, the author of the books, he's said in like AMAs and stuff that at the time he was writing the series, he just wasn't in a romantic mindset, and that he might have been kinder to the couples if he wrote it now.
You can definitely
Now that he's
tell.
happily married, he might have written some of the couples differently, I think. So I have to wonder if that actually, I mean, we don't meet Billings' wife in the books, but yeah, in general, Yeah, the couples don't fare
Yeah, the
well.
couples don't feel so maybe they've introduced Billings' wife into the show a bit more, just to give us one couple that doesn't end tragically.
Maybe.
Please.
Maybe. So a porter rushes in with a message for the sheriff. It's an emergency. Billings radios Juliet with panic in his voice. So you can hear he's panicked, but she still just turns it off because she's on her own mission, Mission Meadows. But Meadows is not at her office. She's out sick with a cold, her secretary, Taj Kandula, says. Luke, do you think the secretary genuinely believes she has a cold?
The secretary definitely knows that she's ill. I certainly
Mm.
don't think the secretary is in on any. If Meadows is being poisoned, like we spoke about last episode, I don't think she's in on it.
No, but, she's probably also not, so naive as to I think even the
Yeah,
way she says it kind of suggests, she's, wink, wink, sick.
yeah, and we also find out she likes bacon and eggs.
Yes,
More
exactly.
bacon.
So more bacon, lots of
Yeah.
bacon lovers in the silo. Cut to Billings, running down the stairs in a panic, radioing all deputies to report to level 26. He can't mean the whole silo, right? Like,
Yeah,
even
no,
Hank down deep?
I assume he meant all deputies in the mid.
Okay,
Because
fair.
yeah, whatever. But by the time Hank gets there, whatever's happened is gonna have happened.
I mean, but the 26 isn't even the mids. That is technically their
Okay,
jurisdiction,
okay.
the
So
top third.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think he meant sort of every deputy within a particular section. So
Okay.
and yeah, like Chelsea Uche really does sell the panic in his voice because
Right.
you got to remember this is the first time as a deputy that Billings will have dealt with anything like this.
Right.
So Billings is still a newbie.
Mhm.
Leaving aside all the other stuff with the syndrome and Juliet. This is Billings' first time dealing with like a major public disturbance, and I think it's just one line, but it's a really good bit of acting to just remind the audience who Billings is
Right.
and that he's new to the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it turns out there's a massive brawl in progress. There was a bar there that was trashed by some rowdy customers visiting from the lower mids or who weren't too happy when they got cut off for taking things too far, or at least that's what the bar owner assumes. And he starts slinging around accusations, which led to things to escalate. Do you think it's believable that Billings and Carnes, the two deputies, could break this up? Because the crowd did not seem interested in cooperating, with several people outright striking out at Billings.
No, and I mean I think Billings hurts his shoulder, or like he has. I think
Yeah,
he
but
has.
he gets an elbow to the face at one
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, so I took that as more deputies turned up off screen,
Right.
and there are a bunch of people in the cells at the moment, probably reevaluating their future in the mines
Yeah.
right now for a couple of months. Yeah, so I'll be interested to see whether in the 3 episodes remaining, whether we see the aftermath of that brawl.
Yeah.
Whether like I say, I'd be really interested to see judicial in action. I'd be really interested to see what a trial looks like
Yeah. Well, I
in the
don't yeah.
asylum.
I mean, yeah, the judge doesn't seem up to for many trials. I'm
Yeah,
curious how many actually take place anymore.
yeah, I mean, I took it that Meadows was the head judge. I don't think she is the only
I mean,
judge.
I don't know. Do you 10,000 people, do you need more than one judge?
Well, it's just that Mayor Johns and Bernard talk about appointing other judges on, Meadows' recommendation.
Judicial people, but yeah, okay,
Okay.
fair. Yeah, but the immediate aftermath is Juliet returns to the station to find a madhouse of bloody faces and silazins and cuffs filling the holding cells. Karens and Billings are a bit understandably pissed off about Juliet turning off her radio. And Billings is like completely done with her shit, yelling, "I am not done," when Juliet tries to cut him off when he's explaining how much he's been covering her ass.
Yeah, Billings has no fucks left to give at this point, and,
Yeah,
I'm with him. I'm with
yeah,
him because he's a brand new deputy, and essentially he's being asked to be 2/3 of the sheriff as well,
right,
and he's ill.
right. That's true. And
So
she knows that. Yeah,
so I was cheering Billings on at this point. I
no.
was like, you go, you tell her.
Well, yeah, it was clearly the wake up call that Juliet needed because this is the point where she finally lets him in on what she's up to, investigating the death of George Wilkins. And yeah, Billings, of course, he knows his name from the relics investigation last week. And he knows what Regina said about George and how that upset Juliet. So, he knows that, Juliet had this unsanctioned relationship, and she just fesses up to it now, and just says, like, "He made me look like a fool, but I still need to know how he died." Do you think we should be worried about Juliet and Billings, their relationship after this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always, I still don't quite know where Billings's loyalties lie,
Hmm,
to be honest, because obviously we talked about this ad nauseum that Judicial was pushing him for sheriff, that he is ex-judicial, but he's also helped Juliet out in loads of ways by this point that he absolutely didn't have to.
yep,
And again, we talked about this last episode. For all that he is supposedly this by the book character, he's getting quite comfortable with breaking the rules at this point.
yeah, that's true.
So
Juliet's a bad influence.
yeah, she is. I don't think Billings would sell Juliet out to Judicial because he thought it was the right thing to do. But he might do if there was some threat to his family, or if he could be convinced that Juliet was a threat to the silo as a whole. He would do it because he thought it was the right thing to do.
Mhm,
Not because it was his job to do it. But yeah, I'm really liking Billings. Like,
right,
he is not anything like the character I imagined him to be in the first few episodes where he's been talked about.
right.
You actually see him. He is not that character at all. And you've said in previous episodes he's quite a sharp departure from Billings in the book as well.
Well, he's more assertive, like, I can't imagine the book Billings, like, clapping back at Juliet like that, but also in the book, one thing that I would say the show improves upon over the book is that, we get to see more of this relationship develop between Juliet and Billings, and I've really been enjoying that in the show.
Okay.
But yeah, they both have something on each other. So Paul knows about Juliet's unsanctioned relationship, amongst other things, but Juliet really has a trump card because she knows that Paul has a syndrome. So maybe that's why he goes along with her investigation after she says she thinks the deaths of George, Marnes, Johns, Trumbull, Holston, and Allison are all connected. What do you think?
Yeah, but like I said last episode, I can't see Judicial not knowing about Billings's condition, and it's
But he doesn't know that they
yeah,
know,
and
if they
and the
do.
fact is, for all he's trying to hide it, Juliet worked it out pretty quickly, and the way that scene in in episode 6 was shot with him with his hands behind his back, the audience I think is supposed to
Hmm.
work it out pretty quickly that he's sick. So it is a secret, but I'm not sure Judicial would care overly much at this point. I think they put him.
I mean, I can see that where Billings obviously I mean, I think if it came out in public to the entire silo, then that
Yeah,
would
that's
be very
that's
bad.
true.
But also, I think Billings thinks it's more of a secret than it is if Judicial does
That's
know.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, so but Billings, he decides to help her. He says, like, "Let's lean into this relics investigation that you opened last week as a way to let her keep doing what she's going to do anyway, let's face it, but in a way that's above board." And Juliet thanks him, and he tells her to thank the pact. Now, Luke, who do you think Billings loves more, his wife or the pact?
Oh, he'd have to sit and think about it for a while, I think. Like, this is the thing. For all we've said that Billings is getting comfortable breaking the rules, from his point of view, he is breaking the letter of the pact to try and maintain the spirit of it.
Right, okay, that's fair.
And so ultimately, I still think from his point of view, his actions are grounded in the spirit of the pact, if not the literal letter of it. And that's why I say I think he might be convinced to sell Juliet out if Sims or somebody else was able to convince him that what she was doing was a genuine threat to the silo. Because I think he
Right,
is
okay.
like a silo patriot, basically. I think he is imbued with the value of, the pact is important because it protects the people of the silo. And I think that really does matter to him. And I think that's where you can see the connection between him and Sims.
Hmm. That they're both yeah. Juliet's more focused on, I mean, let's be honest, like, would she really care about the deaths of, like, Mayor Johns and Marnes if not for George and, the fact that she got to know Holston a bit
Yeah, I
too?
mean that's the thing about Juliet. We can take her as the protagonist, but I wouldn't call her a heroine because her actions are basically too selfish for that.
Hmm.
If this wider plot, to do with the history of the silo, hadn't touched on George Wilkins or hadn't interacted with her life in this profound way, she wouldn't care about it.
Yeah.
I mean, she obviously does care about the silo
Mhm.
because she repaired, she took the risk of repairing the generator.
Yeah, because she does also say, like in the last episode with George, when she's comparing her going to steal the tape from Supply to George and his relics, and she's like, I did what I did because like the silo needed it to keep going. So she sees herself as altruistic, but I'm going to be interested to see how that develops
Mm,
her in her more as like the story
yeah.
progresses. Yeah, but for now, to appease Billings, she says she promises she'll go see Bernard first thing tomorrow, before asking one more favor: Meadows' address, level 15, manager's row. And he suggests that she bring, the bacon and eggs because, I don't know how fast they're going through the pig
Yeah,
population in the silo.
quite rapidly, I would think, at this point. Quite rapidly. I did think the manager's row is interesting
Yeah.
because it's interesting that all the sort of senior members of the silo would live together. And again, that very much reminds me of sort of practice in communist Eastern Europe or modern day China, like in East Germany. There was like literally a little closed town outside Berlin. It was planned out around a lake. And it was totally closed off to the public, and all the East German Politburo lived there, and it had its
Hmm.
own bakery, it had its own salon, it had its own cinema. It was a completely closed off community, and everybody that worked there was a member of the Stasi. Everybody that worked there reported back that all the accommodation was bugged, so like the East German leadership was spying on itself. And I sort of strongly wonder whether that's what Judicial is doing,
Okay.
whether that's what the janitors are doing by having all the senior people within the silo live on the same level,
Right.
whether that just
Right.
makes them so much easier to watch and maintain control over.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Yeah, but Meadows and Bernard, they are tomorrow's problem because tonight her problem is a lovesick puppy with stars in his eyes, played by Avinash. By the way, I couldn't help but note that there's a janitor, or is it a custodian, cleaning the cafeteria as Lucas walks
Yeah.
in. So this show has made anyone with a mop seem sinister. So, yeah, Juliet's already sitting in the cafeteria when Lucas comes in, staring toward the stars, which are hiding behind the clouds for a moment. But the stars come back, and we can clearly see Cassiopeia, the W shaped constellation. And they point to another constellation, but even with pausing, I can't really tell what they're pointing at. Someone was speculating it might be one of the dippers. I don't know. Do you have any
No,
idea?
not a clue. I just sort of looked at that and went, "Oh, stars." Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I grew up with astronomers in my family,
Okay.
and we did a lot of stargazing as a kid. So Cassiopeia always immediately jumps out to me, and that's believable. That even someone who doesn't know about constellations, it's still striking.
Yeah,
Like
that
something
it's
like
a
that.
pattern. Yeah.
Yeah, that the dippers, Orion's belt. I think those are the things that immediately jump out to you. Like, oh, these lights are always in the same formation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Juliet, she starts bumbling into forbidden territory as they're talking and wondering if the stars were there even in the before times, asking Lucas if he's noticed other strange things. He seems surprised that she's going there, but also feels connected that she seems to be saying some of his thoughts out loud. And he tells her about seeing something that sounds like a shooting star or a comet. He says the light that moved across the sky and disappeared. What do you think it is, Luke?
Yeah, it's shooting star comet. Yeah. And also he reveals in this conversation that he works for IT, which is interesting.
Yes, finally we find out Lucas's job. He's a systems analyst for IT. Though he doesn't seem to have any sort of relationship with Bernard, head of IT and current mayor pro tem.
No, he only seems to have met him once or twice.
Yeah, it sounds like a boss's boss situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, Luke, in your first reaction watch through on Discord, you seemed excited to learn this.
Yeah, because it's just, yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean, I trust Bernard a lot more than I trust Sims at this
Okay,
point, but
but
it's the way Lucas says he's only met him once or twice. I wonder. I mean, maybe I'm being overly cynical here, But
Mhm.
maybe Bernard has his own version of the listeners going on here. Maybe Bernard wants to know a little bit more about what Juliet is thinking, and like Bernard knows Juliet enough to know that she doesn't trust him and isn't going to confide in him.
Right.
So maybe you get some doe-eyed waif from IT who's interested in doing a bit of stargazing to sit in the cafeteria that Juliet has to go through to get to her office, remember?
But are you suggesting that Lucas might not even be genuinely interested in stars? Because if that's the case,
Oh,
yeah.
no, no, no. I think he's genuinely interested in stars. But
Okay.
I think maybe Bernard had a quiet conversation. I notice you spend a lot of time in the cafeteria. The sheriff has to go through there. If you could, casually strike up a conversation kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know other people are speculating similar online. I think this is the kind of show that makes everyone seem suspicious. And maybe that's why they took so long to mention that he works for IT, because in the books, yeah, book readers have been waiting for this reveal because it's not a reveal in the books at all. It's one of the first things you learned about Lucas.
Okay.
Actually, previously, when I did readings about Juliet and Lucas together, I cut out references to him working in IT because it was just on the table from their first meeting.
Okay, so maybe I'm overthinking this then.
Well, no, I mean, I think the show is asking you to question all these things,
Yeah.
and and I'm not sitting here to say that things are one way or another, because let's be honest, I don't even really know. Um,
Yeah.
I would have swore until I was blue in the face that it wasn't going to be Sims. They were waking up in the middle of the night, so don't listen to me. But
Okay.
um, but yeah, I think I'm glad that they made this reveal, because I think in the context of the show, like, every sci-fi show needs a hacker character, right? And
Yeah,
we've
yeah, yeah.
already lost Allison and George. So I'm guessing that Lucas is going to help her sort through the hard drive that she finds again this episode.
Yeah, that's true, because we already know she can pick actual locks, but not computer locks. So
Right.
yeah, Lucas may well come in handy.
Right. In the book, Julia gets this hard drive information with the help of the character Scotty I mentioned in a previous episode, who used to be Juliet's shadow before being recruited to IT. And Hugh Howey told our friend Silo TV fans on Twitter that he'd fought for Scotty to make the show, but was overruled. So I'm guessing it's at least in part because they want to give this part of his story to Lucas. Because,
Okay.
yeah, they're going to need an excuse to smooth over the awkwardness of Lucas leaning in for that kiss and getting rejected hard.
Yeah. Hit the bricks, Lucas. You got no game.
But not, I mean, I disagree though, because Juliet definitely leaned into it for a moment. So I put up a picture on my Twitter, where you can see she's closed her eyes and like is leaning forward and parted her lips before, I assume, her brain screamed George at her, and she just noped the hell out of there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, Luke, you continue to be critical of Lucas's moves, I guess.
No, I think, like you say, I think actually Lucas is. I'm starting to like Lucas a bit more.
Yeah.
Because the first time, I think in episode 5, when he put the moves on Juliet, I thought he came across as creepy, and now I think I've gotten into he's just not very good at this.
Yeah. I think there's something comforting about that after George being like a bit too good at this.
That's true, actually. And like you say, Juliet was clearly thinking about it. So, like I said last episode, I would put good money on them falling into bed at some point before the end of the series.
Okay, all right. Yeah, but even after she leaves, Juliet's still thinking about their exchange, because back in her apartment, she opens the book to a page about the Science Space Center featuring stars and constellations. So I guess she knows those words now and she can teach them to Lucas.
Yeah.
And of course, the camera mirror is in full view the whole time while she's doing this. So, by the way, random world building detail I love next time Juliet walks the stairs. In our world, we take those seed pods from trees like maples and sycamores and we call them helicopter seeds. And if you drop them in the air, they twirl and whirl as they fall. I always think now about the Pixar movie Soul when it comes to this. They had a really good animation sequence with that. But yeah, of course, they have no trees in Silo. So they form instead like strips of paper into the same shape and drop them off the stairs, which seems like an expensive toy in this world,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but still. Did you ever play with helicopter seeds as a kid,
Oh
Luke?
yeah. I mean, and yeah, like I thought that was an interesting bit of world building, but I was with you. It's like, don't waste that paper.
Yeah.
That's expensive paper.
Yeah.
Do you have
Yeah,
any
they
idea
seem
how long it took the farm to grow those trees,
I
dry
know.
them?
Are you running back down to the bottom to collect them?
Yeah,
Are you paying a porter to do it?
yeah.
Yeah, so back up in the mayor's office, Bernard tells her he's received a threat, and Juliet goes into, ooh, protection mode. But he's like, calm down, Sheriff. I know it's not your inclination, but I need you to listen. Like, boom.
But,
She keeps getting called out left and right this
yeah.
episode.
And Bernard seems very tired. He seems very sort of low. I mean, I don't know whether
Yeah.
it's just the register Tim Robbins is speaking in, but he seems tired. He seems sort of really stressed and yeah, a
Okay.
little. Maybe I'm reading too much into the performance, but I thought he was a little bit
No,
stressed, a
I
little bit
mean,
depressed.
probably that sounds about right. I mean, we were worried about his alcohol consumption
Yeah,
before, so yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and he says he got in trouble with Judge Meadows for stepping in when Sims accused Juliet of planting the Pez dispenser, which she did, by the way. But uh, the threat brought to him by Sims is that if Bernard were to step in again, she would use the pact. She, being Judge Meadows, would use the pact to boot him from office. Now, Luke, we pretty much know by the end of this episode that things are mostly done in Judge Meadows' name rather than by her herself. Do you think Bernard knows this?
No, I don't think he does.
Okay.
I think this is more evidence of what I've been talking about for the last couple of podcasts. But Bernard says, I made it a habit to not get in Judicial's way, to go along with what Judicial wanted, and I think Bernard. I'm not sure that he ever wanted to be mayor, but he wanted to be a power broker in the silo. He wanted to be like a behind the scenes fixer, the guy that went to make things happen. And I think he very rationally thought that being on good terms with Judicial was key to making that happen. And the thing is, now he's mayor, I think there are things he wants to do. He wants to actually be mayor, he wants to actually be in charge of the silo, and he needs allies outside of and beyond Judicial, and the sheriff's office is a logical sort of first place to go to. So I think this threat is perfectly genuine, but I also think he's using it as a way to build alliances with the sheriff's office institutionally and Juliet personally as well.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and then so in the scene, Bernard also he goes on to explain why he thinks his job is the most important in the silo, even more important than Juliet's former job keeping the generator running. She says, "Because without power, we have nothing." And Bernard responds to that, "It's how the power is used." In IT, they maintain all the servers, the computing power that keeps everything in the silo running, from watering crops to circulating air. Do you think he's right? Do you think that he has the most important job? This stuff sounds important, but it's also true that none of the servers would run without
Yeah,
power.
I mean, I think to be honest, the way the silo is structured, there is no such thing as an unimportant job.
Right.
there are only 10,000 people in this society, so I think because you can make the argument that without the people working on the farm, nobody eats.
Right.
Without the people in the mines, there's no fuel.
Well, they use steam, but
Yeah,
yeah.
well, without the medical personnel, disease would run around.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is a most important job in the silo. I think it's an ecosystem, and everybody has his niche.
Yeah, but maintaining the generators and the servers have got to be two of the more important ones. And I think the most important thing about that is that they are very specialized jobs where you can't, like a porter, if something happens to a porter,
Yeah,
another porter can start immediately.
yeah, yeah. So, but I didn't really understand the nature of the threat because what is it exactly? I'm not sure exactly what it is that Judge Meadows is threatening Bernard with.
I mean, yeah, so, I mean, I think we can call it Sims, but,
Yeah,
but what Judicial is threatening him with is removing him from the mayor's office if, and also, yeah, so he starts to imply that, yeah, Judicial could try to take control of the
yeah.
servers.
I got the esoteric reading of the pact might remove him from the mayor's office, but why does he think it's in Judicial's interest to start messing around with the servers?
Do you think he genuinely believes that, or do you think he's just saying that to
That's the thing. I can't tell because like the way Tim Robbins plays Bernard, I always question his sincerity about everything. But I think this is the closest we've seen to Bernard being sincere, and he's definitely freaked out about something.
Mhm.
Now that could just be the judicial removing him from the mayor's office, maybe, but I just don't see
You think
what.
it's something bigger?
Yeah, I just don't see what Judicial would get out of messing around with the servers.
Yeah, what are they gonna do with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that as a threat. I don't know what they would do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I also question if he's just using that as an excuse to hide what he considers the real threat to be.
Well, if he is, he's a better actor than he was during Marne's and Mayor John's funeral. He seemed really sincere to me here. Or as close to sincere as Bernard gets.
See, I thought at the funeral was, for me, his most sincere moment.
Okay.
Because I think that's his real, like, awkward I don't know,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. I guess the awkwardness goes with the character.
And it was really moving talking about all the people who, only knew Johns as mayor, yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so Bernard, he tells Juliet that they need to find something they can use to hold Meadows back. And it was in this scene, by the way, that I began to wonder if Tim Robbins had been cast because he's got, like, those angelic look when he smiles with, like, the dimples and the twinkly eyes. How are you feeling about Bernard this week? Where is he on the Juliet to Sims scale for you?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know whether I like Bernard, but I dislike him a heck of a lot less
Mhm.
than I did at the start of the show, and I think that's credit to Tim Robbins and credit to the writers. And yeah, I think he clearly cares about the silo and the people in it, and yes, he is ambitious. Yes, he wants to be the power behind the throne, but I increasingly think that ambition comes from a place of genuine concern about his society and his world, and wanting to do what's right.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that might be what in the end connects all these characters together, from Sims through Bernard all the way to Juliet and Holston. They all have radically different visions of what is right for the silo, but I think they all ultimately, at the end of the day, are trying to do what they think is best for it.
Right. Yeah, and it's true. Even Juliet, she has her moments where in doing what she thinks is best for the silo, or, her vendetta at the moment seems kind of personal related to George. But in general, when she talks about like stealing the tape from Supply and things like that, she's saying she takes risks when she thinks it will benefit the greater good. But then, like Sims and other people, we see her doing selfish things in the name of taking these risks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Bernard drops the bomb. So Billings wasn't just hired to replace Marnes, he's being lined up as Juliet's replacement as well. It's just a matter of time, Bernard says, until Meadows figures out a reason to push Juliet out. So she better go get to the bottom of her investigation fast. Now, cut to Juliet bringing Meadows, Tanya Moody, breakfast. And yeah, Meadows doesn't want to open the door at first because I'm not well. But then Juliet accuses her of locking up Silazins and drugging them against their will, referring to Gloria, and then the door opens. And inside, we see that Meadows has one of the most luxe apartments we've seen yet, full of relics in glass cases, like an Etch-a-Sketch and a Frisbee disc. I used to love my Etch-a-Sketch. Do you think she ever plays with any of her toys, Luke?
Oh, come on! If you were a child in the 80s and 90s, everybody had an Etch a Sketch and everybody loved it. So I like to think she takes it out of the box every so often and just gives it a little twiddle and just plays with it a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like that's one that kind of explains itself, even if you don't have a manual. If you just start playing with the knobs, you're like,
Yeah, you just
oh,
start playing with the knobs. You're gonna work out what it is eventually.
yeah.
Has she got the pencil with it, or did, like everybody with
Oh,
an
right.
Etch a
That was
Sketch?
that
Did
separate
did you
thing.
lose that little stylus
Yeah.
thing?
Oh, I'm sure that's centuries gone by now, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, and as Juliet walks in, we also see Meadows push a bottle of clear liquid out of sight, which Juliet definitely clocks. And yet we see Meadows drinking what looks like orange juice, but Juliet later calls it her cold medicine with the same disdain on her face as when she noticed the bottle. What do you think? Do you think Meadows might be indulging in some breakfast screwdrivers?
I have to say, I've watched the episode through several times, and I missed this because I think I was more focused on what the characters were going to say to each other. But yeah, that does make sense because Meadows is clearly not faking that she's ill. She's clearly unwell, and
But
whatever
what kind of unwell? Yeah.
yeah, and whatever she's unwell with is probably worse than a head cold.
Hmm.
So yeah, and as we're about to find out, Meadows certainly has reason to be engaging in the occasional morning screwdriver
Yeah.
because she's clearly She's clearly not the person we thought she was.
Yeah, she's a powerful figurehead with no power. Yeah. That'll
Yeah,
lead you to feeling futile and depressed for sure. Um,
definitely.
but Juliet, she doesn't quite realize this just yet. But she gets straight to the point in that Juliet way. She wants to question Gloria about the relic situation, the one that Meadows signed off on in the previous episode, which she kind of barely remembers doing. But Gloria's been drugged and locked up. And yeah, Meadows doesn't seem to know anything about what's going on with her. It's just some vague memory. And Juliet calls out both diagnoses as BS at the same time. She's like, Gloria doesn't have dementia any more than you have a cold. And yeah, Meadows, she pushes back, saying Juliet has no more qualifications to make medical diagnoses than she does to be sheriff, which is fair. So it's a good thing Juliet has a doctor in the family because that was one sick burn.
Yeah, Juliet is going straight to the burn unit for that.
But Juliet makes Meadows an offer. If Meadows lifts Gloria's medical order, Juliet will turn in her badge by the end of the week. And she's not taking the threat of Sims as an answer. And this is where Meadows drops her bomb. She can't actually do anything. She doesn't have the power. Juliet refuses to stop her investigation, to which Meadows replies, they'll never let you. And she goes back to her quote unquote cold medicine while a single tear rolls down her face. Who do you think the they is in this case?
I mean, I think it probably refers to the janitors. Now, whether that refers to Sims,
Right.
I think is more of an open question. I think the janitors are like the ultimate authority. Unless something is going on off screen that we haven't seen yet, it looks like the janitors sit at the apex of this invisible power structure that is actually controlling the silo.
I mean, it does seem though that Sims is the one who's immediately leaning over Meadows. He's the one. Anytime we've seen an interaction with Meadows before this point, Sims has been like hovering there, interceding. Yeah.
But I mean, what's curious about this is if that's true, if the janitors are the ultimate authority, and if Sims is the ultimate authority within the janitors, why bother with Meadows? Why bother having a puppet at all? Why not just make Sims the head of judicial, and then, or why not make Sims mayor and have the whole thing have reality and fantasy match each other? Why go to the trouble of having this subterfuge, which is what makes me think that Sims is probably not the ultimate bad guy.
Okay, fair point.
Because if he were, why not just have yourself made mayor? It'd be so much easier.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, Juliet, of course, thinks she has it all figured out already. And she's like, the apartment, the relics, you get to keep them as long as you're quiet. And we see Meadows lie back into, I'm not dealing with this anymore mode again. And the last thing Meadows says before kicking Juliet out is, you don't know anything about me. So what do you think she means by that? What is there to know that would explain her going along with this, do you think?
Well, that was a question I wanted to ask you, because does this move forward your Carla Meadows theory in any way?
I mean, I guess the question is, does she chew with her mouth open?
Yeah.
I don't know. So I did hear Hugh Howey say that, we'll be meeting Carla by the end of the season, but I don't know if that means Meadows or if that means somebody else altogether, a new character.
I mean, if she became judge and then found out she was just a puppet, I think that would go a long way to explaining why her and Walker's marriage failed, and it might even go some way to explaining why Walker decided to decamp all the way down to mechanical.
Yeah, that's a big X to get away from.
It's a big X to get away from. And maybe Walker knew more about the inner workings of the silo than she has let on, because maybe that's why she hasn't left the workshop. Maybe shutting herself in that workshop is the best solution to not raise suspicion from the janitors that she's onto them or is in any way sort of important. Maybe I'm overthinking that, but
no. I mean, all valid so far. Yeah. I'm glad to have at least some assurance that we'll get more. It seems like more backstory on the Walker side at least. So, looking forward to that. Yeah, and of course, there's a camera in the judge's apartment, so the watchers are watching everything. But when Sims wants to check in on Juliet's visit with Gloria, it looks like somebody has placed some flowers in front of the mirror. And it's Holston, we find out later. Sims is mad because the watchers haven't done anything about the flowers, which I guess they must have been there at least a bit. But I guess they're probably not regularly looking in on Gloria much these days. There hasn't been a reason to worry about her for a while, I'm
Yeah.
assuming.
I mean, that is one of the big questions I think that is developing as we get further into this mystery, which is how far did Holston get? Because
Right.
he clearly worked out that the cameras were there, and he clearly worked out that they were fairly ubiquitous. But how much does he know about the janitors? How much does he know about Sims? I guess what I'm saying is Juliet following a path that Holston's already blazed, or is she now beyond where Holston got to in terms of solving this larger mystery of
Hmm.
what's really going on with the silo? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah. So how far did Holston Becker actually get in his sort
Yeah.
of investigation?
That's a good question. Good question. Okay, so we cut to Jules sitting in a hallway feeling sorry for herself when who shows up but Dr. Daddy? Ian Glenn. It's their reunion, probably the first time they've seen each other in 20 years. And I got to say, this was a welcome difference from the books for me because it takes longer for Juliet and her father to reunite in the book, and it happens under like completely different specific circumstances. So I'm definitely not going to be reading out that scene or talking about that right now. But every time I read this part of Wool, where Juliet is up top being sheriff and investigating things, I'm mentally screaming at her, please go see your father now. So I'm glad she did. What did you think of this
Well, it
reunion?
was a reunion, but it wasn't exactly the happiest of reunions.
No.
And Daddy Doctor Nichols is there. I've imagined this moment so many times, and all the things I would say, and then
Right.
Juliet just shuts him down dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Juliet in this moment is actually quite cruel to her dad because it's
Yeah.
quite clear that he is trying to reach out and she is just not having any of it. Now, the kindest interpretation to put on that is that she doesn't want to put him in any more trouble than she absolutely has to. But on the other hand, she's about to ask him for a huge and
Yeah.
dangerous favor. So
Yeah, but it does also sound like, based on what we hear later, that she blames him for something for whatever happened with her mother.
yeah.
So that probably is also playing a role here too.
And episode 8, the title for it is
Yeah.
Hannah, which is Juliet's mother's name. So we may well find out what that thing is next week.
I'm sure we will. The backstory is coming. Yeah, and we found out that Dr. Nichols was transferred to this smaller apartment after ... He trails off, but I'm assuming he means after the death of his wife. We know the same thing happened with Patrick Kennedy when his wife, darling Doris, died. And the other thing is, yeah, Juliet notices her brother's stuffed dog on a shelf.
Yeah.
So we called that.
Dr. Nichols' apartment everybody's apartment in the silo was small, but his seemed particularly pokey and
Mm,
particularly barren. So I wonder whether it was just like the housing authority realizing that all the guy really needs his apartment for is to sleep in. Because the way the apartment was lit, the way the set was dressed, like it's clear he's not actually really living in this apartment.
right.
It's just a place to crash.
Yeah. Yeah. But as you said, Juliet isn't here for cuddles and a trip down memory lane. She wants her father's help getting Gloria lucid. And yeah, Dr. Nichols is reluctant, of course, because this is obviously highly illegal, but it seems to be the only way to get his daughter back in his life. So he agrees to it. And he walks into long term care in his doctor coat and tells Nurse Amy that he's just here to grab some medicine. Then he does like some of the most awkward sneaking around possible. So I think it's safe to say Dr. Nichols is not a
Yeah,
spy.
he may be the only character apart from Juliet that we can safely say is not a watcher,
Yeah.
because yeah, that guy is definitely not a friend of the silo, because he'd be spotted in about 30 seconds flat.
Yeah.
He is just monstrously uncomfortable with the whole thing. And also, Nurse Amy, are the doctors allowed to just come in and
Taking your
jonesing
medicine.
aspirin off you?
I mean, I suppose it's, if there are any listeners who work in hospitals, they can verify. But I can imagine that's not so
Yeah,
crazy.
I can imagine it happens, but it's probably not best
But
practice,
it's
Nurse.
probably memorable though because he doesn't work in that department.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
she's going to remember Dr. Nichols came by, even though he works in the
yeah. I
nursery.
mean,
Yeah.
like I say, I'm not optimistic of his chances of making it past episode 8.
Well, he lures a drugged up Gloria out of her bed with the promise of babies. So the thing that Gloria was never allowed to have. And the nursery, of course, again, being where he normally works. So he knows somehow it's not being surveilled like the other parts of the silo. We find out from the watchers that some cameras have gone down over time. So they have to pick and choose where to place them. And The doctor, of course, he doesn't know about the cameras, but he says, I don't know why, but they don't listen in here. Now, I can understand why they wouldn't see the nursery as a high prio spot for surveillance, but how do you think Peter Nichols knew about
I
that?
mean, I just think he obviously knows this particular part of the silo well. It's where he spends the vast majority of his waking time is in that hospital, in that medical unit. So I think this probably goes for all of the citizens of the silo. I think if you were living in that society and if you were sort of vaguely aware that the friends of the silo were a thing, you would almost by osmosis pick up quite quickly where they were listening and where they weren't, and where
Right.
it was safe to have a conversation.
Where people get called out for
Yeah.
minor transgressions. Okay. Well, the doctor has some bad news for his daughter. It's going to take 5 to 6 hours for the lorazepam to leave Gloria's system, but they definitely don't have that kind of time. There's going to be a night nurse coming in a couple hours to check in on the babies, which seems like a long time to leave newborns alone. No?
Yeah, I'm going to be generous and call plot armor on this because yeah, it's just a device for the plot because yeah, there'd be nurses around every 10 minutes, surely.
Yeah, I would imagine that's just something. I mean, not that you're waking the babies, but you're at least
Yeah,
making sure they're
you're at
still
least making
breathing.
sure they're still breathing. Yeah.
So yeah, and then when Juliet starts to get stressed, her father tells her to step back and take a deep breath. And she's like, that didn't work when I was 5, and it still doesn't. And of course, this exchange is meant to show that these two characters have history, but I also think it's an important life lesson for everyone. Listen, telling someone who is upset to calm down almost always has the exact opposite
Yeah, I
effect.
mean,
Don't do it.
you were saying earlier on there wasn't much comedy in this episode, and that's right, but that did make me chuckle because
Oh, that made my blood boil, but
it's okay.
But Juliet is, of course, she's like habitual line stepper, and she's stepping over some lines now. And her father has to remind her that Gloria is not just a machine that can be switched on and off. But Juliet still, she bullies her father into giving Gloria medication to reverse the sedation, which results in a seizure, which is apparently what he was afraid of, though he didn't say so. And interestingly, seizures are one of the things that lorazepam is used to sedate.
Yeah. I think this goes back to your point a couple of podcasts ago. Clear communication, people. Clear communication. It
Yeah,
would save so much
yeah.
time.
But then again, then we wouldn't have gotten our reveals.
That's
So
true.
I don't know.
That's
Maybe
true.
Gloria needed to have that seizure. Sorry, Gloria.
Yeah.
But yeah, Juliet and her dad have practice with dealing with seizures, it seems, thanks to Juliet's brother. We see a little glimpse of that. Again, hoping for more next week. And yeah, taking care of Gloria together is like the most we've seen these two characters bond yet. Though helping her in this case seems to come down mostly to the doctor holding her in place while his daughter feels her pulse and counts the seconds. But the seizure abates, and a warm moment passes between them briefly while they wait for Gloria to wake up. He basically tells his daughter that he's proud of her, but she won't tell him what's going on or why she's pulled him into this. Luke, do you think that father and daughter are going to be able to rebuild their relationship?
I hope so, but like I say, I don't have much faith in Dr. Nichols' longevity in this show because, given what the janitors can see on the monitors, even if they don't monitor this particular part of the hospital, they saw Juliet and Dr. Nichols go in there, and presumably at some point they'll see one or both of them come out. So if they don't catch Juliet, then the next logical person for them to go and visit is Dr. Nichols. Now, that's not necessarily saying he's going to be killed. They may well want to interrogate him. They may well put him in whatever sort of off the books prison that maybe the janitors are running in some deep and distant part of the silo. But I think at the very least he's liable to go missing for a couple of episodes.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. And yeah, Gloria, she wakes up confused. She's confused about where she is. She's confused about why Juliet is calling herself sheriff when that's Holston's job. She seems to be unaware or forgetting that Holston has died. But at the name and face of Dr. Nichols, a memory comes back sharply. He is the doctor who did to her what Dr. Leonard did to Allison in the first episode. He told her he took out the birth control when she won the lottery, but he didn't. Now, after failing 2 lotteries, Gloria, she figured out what was going on, and she knew her husband wanted children and she'd never be allowed to have them. So she pushed her husband away so that he could go have kids with someone else. Quite the tragic backstory for our Gloria.
Yeah.
And her husband apparently saw her with his new family and pretended he didn't know her because now she's like the crazy fertility lady.
Oh. And so Dr. Nichols fesses up immediately to this, which I
Mhm.
thought was interesting.
Yeah.
He doesn't even attempt to deny it, which I suppose is to his credit. And he says that he was told to do this to stop the spread of genetic disease, which I guess is kind of plausible. Although it would seem cruel to let people think that they could have children if that was in fact the case.
Yeah, I thought at first that they used a different doctor in the first episode to, so that they didn't implicate Dr. Nichols in this whole like birth control gaslighting practice. But yeah, as you say, he immediately fesses up. He's just done what he was told, and he justifies it that, he had to do this in order to be allowed to do the rest of his job, which is helping people. He was told about this genetic disease thing you said. It's to prevent the spread of genetic disease, which lends enough an air of plausibility that you can think, okay, maybe I'm not the baddie, even though he secretly wondered if the powers that be were trying to punish the people they picked. But he says there are consequences to asking questions. So, Luke, what do you think of Dr. Nichols now that we've spent a little more time with
Yeah,
him?
I mean, I don't know like quite how hard to be on Dr. Nichols because on the one hand, what he did and the fertility doctors are doing is despicable. On the other hand, Dr. Nichols has been through quite a bit in his life, and I wonder whether what we're going to find out in the next episode is I wonder whether Dr. Nichols thinks what happened with Jacob, what happened with Juliet's brother, is some sort of retribution, is some sort of cosmic, karmic punishment that's been visited on him for doing this.
Yeah.
Because it does seem to like weigh on his soul that he did this. And also, he knows enough to know that the genetic disease story was just flim flam, was just bullshit. So
Yeah, I mean, our inclination is to be hard on him for not like sticking his neck out. But yeah, the reality is during times of war, during like the Holocaust, during other times, people who stick their necks out do often get their heads chopped off. So on the one hand, you can see him protecting himself, and of course, we want everyone to be the hero. But we were talking off air about the Milgram experiment, and the Milgram experiment, for anyone who's not familiar with it, it was something, an experiment conducted in the US after World War II. And Stanley Milgram, he wanted to test whether, people were like, well, what happened in Germany, that's unique to Germans, but Americans would never. And so they tested this by having subjects would come in, and they were told that they were asking questions to another person in the experiment. In reality, the person was in on the whole thing. They weren't actually real, but the other person thought that they were shocking this other person every time they got an answer wrong. And every time they got an answer wrong, they were also supposed to turn up the voltage on the shocks. So that at some point, the person that's being shocked starts complaining about heart problems. And then at some point, they just, pass out completely, it seems. And still, like more than well over 60% went all the way to the end, past the point of the other person passing out. And the vast majority, like 90% or something, went up to that point. So in reality, most of us are not the heroes that we like to think that we are when we're put in that situation and we're being told by an authority figure to do something. Although, Luke, you mentioned someone.
yeah, there is an interesting factoid. One of the people that took part in that experiment was a guy called Ron Rittenhouse, and he is also the guy who he didn't shock anybody. He refused to administer a single shock to like even at the lowest setting. He refused to do it. And Ron Rittenhouse is also the guy who originally blew the whistle on the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War. So yeah,
Those people exist.
those people exist. Yeah,
But yeah, most of us are not Ron Rittenhouse,
yeah.
especially not Dr. Nichols.
Especially not Dr. Nichols.
But I do have some sympathy for him. But he's upsetting Gloria at this point in time. And so Juliet chases her father out of the room. And ultimately, she shows Gloria the Georgia book to get her to calm down and trust her a bit more. And of course, this is the book that Gloria spends all of her mental energy escaping into. So she's thrilled to see it again. But she's still confused. She remembers she gave the book to her sister, George's mother, though she can't quite remember her sister's name. She remembers it again later. It's Anne. It's written in the book, Gloria. And this is where we also find out who the Flamekeepers are. So my speculation was correct in that the Flamekeepers are the secret history keepers, but I didn't realize it was going to be Gloria and her sister. There were others, of course, but now it's up to Juliet to carry on that legacy. Juliet with the dangerous book about the world that was. And yeah, it turns out also that George and Juliet's mothers were working together on that illegal magnifying device that's been mentioned before. I'm guessing we'll also learn more about that in the next episode. And yeah, Gloria says she's surprised that they let Hannah Nichols have kids. She wasn't a flamekeeper, but she had the same type of curious mind. What do you think, Luke? Did they just miss her?
I mean, I don't think this is like a foolproof system because
Right.
they seem to be doing it based on people's personalities, presumably like the reports they get from the listeners. So maybe Hannah Nichols was just very good at compartmentalizing, uh,
Right.
and maybe very good at keeping secrets.
Yeah, and this whole magnifying thing where she, got arrested or whatever for building this magnifying device, that didn't happen until after both kids were born. So maybe she just wasn't on their radar before that.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, Gloria says about Hannah, when I found out what happened to her, it really felt like we'd lost one of our own. And she asked Juliet at the end of the episode if she knows why her mom killed herself. And Dr. Nichols says at another point, I know you think I betrayed mom, but Juliet isn't ready to hear whatever he was going to say after that at this point. So, Luke, what do you think happened to Hannah Nichols? And how do you think Juliet thinks her dad betrayed her?
No idea, but I'm almost certain we're going to find out answers to these and many other questions in the next episode.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Gloria drops another bomb here as well. She says that they put something in the water after the rebellion to make people forget. Boom. What?
Yeah, because this is what I said at the beginning of the episode, why I think that this more or less confirms that the rebellion happened or something, a rebellion type event happened. Because I think what Gloria is saying here is the rebellion sort of turned on whether or not people in the silo should or wanted to be able to commemorate the world outside. And it's easy to come up with a scenario about why people would think knowing things about the outside world is bad, is dangerous, because if the world outside is poisoned, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to have a bunch of all these images of it that might tempt people to open the lid of the silo or to
Right.
want to go outside. So
Right.
I can see why, from a certain point of view, just on a utilitarian basis, it might be a good idea if people didn't think very much about the outside world.
Yeah. No, that definitely seems to be the case where we see them constantly discouraged to think about it, to talk about it, to
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I'm honestly I'm unsure of what I can say here because this actually is a concept from later in the series of books. And it's like it seems to be part of the remixing the books to make it work for TV thing we've talked about previously. So I don't want to say too much about it until the show does. But I mean, it seems you believe her. You don't I know some people think it's paranoia. Some people just think that like Gloria might not we shouldn't maybe trust everything she says.
Maybe not, but I don't see why at this point she would have any motive to lie. So if it's paranoia, it's a story, it's being passed to her. I think she's telling Juliet the truth as best she knows what the truth is, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, and it's hard to chalk things up to paranoia with her anymore, considering okay, she was like turning on the water to drown out the listeners in the first episode. Turns out she was right about that. She was telling Allison about, the not being allowed to have kids. Turns out she was right about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, she has earned herself a bit of credibility, and there's got to be a reason why they've been drugging her like
And
that.
it just makes what she's saying makes sense. It fits with what we know about the silo. And what we know about the little we know about the silo's history.
Right. And and so then Juliet takes Gloria back to her room where she learns that Holston had been for a visit during his final days and he'd placed flowers to block the mirror, the flowers we saw blocking the camera earlier. But now that they come back, while they've been out, it seems somebody's taken the flowers because Gloria notices that they're gone. And she also confesses to Juliet that there's something in Gloria's vent, the hard drive, of course. Um, Now, Luke, why do you think that Holston gave the hard drive to Gloria and not Juliet? You think he knew about the Flamekeepers?
I'm not sure he knew about the Flamekeepers. I think he knew that Gloria knew something about the history of the silo and how the silo worked. So I'm not sure he knew about the Flamekeepers, but I think he probably did recognize that Gloria had been right about Allison, and that therefore she knew more about what was going on than he did.
Yeah, true. And also, Holston, of course, had that file of George's, so he also knows that
Yeah.
Gloria was interviewed about George's relics habit.
And I think he would also trust that, Gloria has been living on the edge of society within the silo long enough that she would be able to competently hide the hard drive. Whereas if you'd given it to Juliet, for all Juliet's spikiness and for all she's living in the down below, as sort of deputy head of mechanical, she is actually sort of quite well socialized into the mainstream of silo society. So if you'd given her the hard drive at this point without letting Juliet take all the steps that she's taken, she might have just handed it to the down deep deputy.
Right.
I don't think Holston could trust her enough to know what she would do with that hard drive if he just gave it straight to her.
Right. Because, yeah, she certainly didn't seem that
Yeah.
invested in what he was looking into. Yeah. Yeah. And meanwhile, while all of this is going on, Sims has entered janitorial. It definitely looks like there might be we talked about there maybe being some film canisters in there. I caught what looks like it could be a glimpse of it on his left as he walks in. And there are two padlocked doors between that entrance and the surveillance room. So I'm actually surprised if they have film canisters. That's not where they
Yeah.
would keep them, in the surveillance room, but whatever. How many people do you think know about this room? Because at one point I counted like 6 people in there, and you'd think they must work in shifts,
Yeah.
right? Like those 2 guys get to sleep, I hope.
Again, and this is the thing, they must be completely isolated from the rest of the silo, because if you're the head of the janitors, how do you guarantee that one of them isn't going to one of them isn't going to say something incriminating in casual conversation, isn't going to forget themselves, isn't going to leave clues around at some point. So I'm guessing that there must be a separate little set of cells, apartments, separate little section to the silo that they live in, and they don't actually interact with the. Well, I just
You
think,
think? That seems almost cruel to say you can only
yeah,
ever know each other. I don't know,
no,
because
Sims
Sims
can,
doesn't do that. But Sims said that people who work in janitorial, people might think you're something
yeah.
else. You can't tell them your real job, but I don't think it's that they can't mingle.
I don't know. I just think the size of because this is the reason why I don't believe in UFOs.
Mhm.
This is the reason why I think Lee Harvey Oswald did shoot Kennedy. Because, in conspiracies that large, somebody always says something to somebody at some point.
Right.
Too many people would have to keep that secret in order for it to stay secret. And I just can't believe that for 140 years or however long the janitors have existed, nobody has slipped up. No, nobody has slipped up once, unless they were completely isolated.
Or they did and they ended up like Trumbull.
That's true.
Right.
That's true.
And then it becomes a lot less appealing to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, inside the room, everyone's in a panic because they've lost track of the sheriff because she's gone into that blind spot. And they finally catch sight of her again when she's wheeling Gloria back to long-term care. But then Juliet, in Gloria's room, she susses out what's been going on with the flowers and that they're somehow being watched through the mirrors. So she says the jig is up, throws a blanket over the mirror while she retrieves the hard drive from the vent. So, of course, the people in the surveillance room, the watchers, they don't know what she did after she blocked the camera, but they do know she's on to them. And that's enough for Sims to sick the big dogs on them.
Yeah. I've got to say, Sims is not being particularly helpful in
No.
all of this. It's just if I were one of the techs, I'd go, yeah, Mr. Sims, we're doing the best we can. Sit down, calm down, stop shouting just stop shouting at everybody. You're not helping.
Boss from hell. Yeah.
And this goes back to what I was saying at the very top of the podcast. Sims seems genuinely rattled, and there isn't much in this world that rattles Sims.
Right.
And I think it's not just that he's annoyed. I think he's frightened. And again, that brings me back to what is he frightened of and who is he frightened of?
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, so for now, the episode ends with the secret police's task force being sent to go deal with Juliet. But when they enter Gloria's room in full riot gear, Juliet is gone. Fin. End of episode.
Also, I'm going to say subtle, guys. Just pounding down the stairs in full riot
Yeah.
gear. No one's going to notice, like half a dozen heavily armed
I mean, but
guys.
that's clearly it's clearly at the point where Sims is so rattled, as you say, that he's willing to do this because there's no way he thinks that this is any kind of secret when that happens.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If they were willing to do that, then why aren't they willing to have just killed Gloria off at some point
Well, that's the
before the
I
story
mean,
started?
I think they just didn't have a good enough reason to, but that's the question now. Like, you said you're worried for Dr. Nichols. Are we worried for Gloria? Are we worried for Juliet?
No, because I'm certainly worried for Juliet and Dr. Nichols. I'm worried for Gloria that she's going to get shot full of drugs
Right.
again.
Well, that seems certain.
But I think I don't know. I think there is some reason why they need to keep Gloria alive. Because if there wasn't, she'd be dead by now.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts about what you think will happen next other than the backstory of Juliet's family?
I'm guessing we'll have an episode cut together from flashbacks, and I'm guessing Juliet trying to avoid the janitorial goons that are charging around the silo.
Right. Okay.
So it will probably be sort of a split episode across two different timelines. Like I say, I don't think anything's going to happen to Juliet. And let's be honest, because Rebecca Ferguson is a producer, and I think if anybody has plot armor on this show, it's Juliet.
Okay.
But I am not at all confident what happens next to Dr. Nichols. I think he could be very unpleasantly interrogated by the janitors because he's the only other person that knows anything about what Gloria and Juliet were discussing that isn't Juliet or Gloria.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, they certainly are going to have footage of him going
yeah.
into the place that Gloria disappeared from. And obviously, they know whose father he is.
And also, how is Sims going to explain having, half a dozen guys in riot gear tromping
Right.
around the silo?
Yeah. This is like a point of no return, regardless.
Yeah, because people will notice
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
There's going to have to be a cover story. And also, presumably, they're going to want to frame Juliet for something as well, just because they're going to want help from the rest of the population to try and find her, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, fair. Yeah, I assume they're not going to say that Juliet has a book that nobody's allowed to look at because then everyone's going to want to look at the book.
No, I don't think they're going to go that far. But yeah, it does go to show like just how rattled the janitors are that they are reduced to resorting to blunt force very visibly.
Right.
Yeah, and I wonder, it can't be easy to hide in the silo because it's a small and heavily populated space.
Right.
To say nothing of the fact that it's under like 24-hour
Surveillance,
constant surveillance.
Yeah.
So
Which Juliet is now aware of. Yeah.
Yeah, hiding's going to be
tricky.
Going to be a real challenge.
So this episode definitely got people talking, and we got a lot of theory crafting feedback and questions coming up soon, as well as our own final thoughts after a quick commercial break.
Now opening the listener feedback channel.
All right, we've got a lot of feedback this week, so let's get right into it. This time we're going to start with the feedback we got on Reddit. Now, the first one comes from Xerexes1, and they said, I really enjoyed the pace of this episode. It flew by, but also had a lot of world building and revelations about characters. Actually, the more that's revealed about the silo, especially the fact that most people know that they are constantly being watched by Judicial and the friends of the silo, and a handful are aware of the mysterious quote-unquote watchers, I'm surprised that there isn't constant unrest. I know that we were provided with an explanation regarding how the Watchers control the population, but obviously it's not completely successful. The biggest question I have is regarding training for specialized work, medical and IT, for example. Wouldn't the study material fall under the category of pre-silo before times? Other questions from this episode: how are they producing sedatives, other injections? How have they not run out of medical supplies in over 140 years? Not to nitpick, but there was no nurse or doctor taking care of that baby in the nursery. Okay. Well, I have a million more questions, but I really just wanted to let you know that I've enjoyed your podcast. So thank you so much, Sir Xerxes. And we talked a bit about the baby in the nursery, so we'll skip that one. But what do you think about the other questions, Luke?
The question about what you would do with like educational materials,
Right.
that is an interesting question because some of that has to be from the before times. Like even if it's been copied and redone and done in a different format, the knowledge itself came from the before times. So particularly when you're talking about chemistry or agriculture or stuff like that, then yes, I suppose there is like an irreducible minimum amount of stuff that people in the silo must know about the before times just in order to function.
Right. Yeah, I mean, of course, they know how to read, they know how to make bacon and eggs, how to make hush puppies. But, yeah, I think when it comes to the more complicated stuff like medical supplies, that is a good question, but you have to assume they must, of course, have been making it this whole time. That must be knowledge that they passed down. But actually, another Reddit user, an Otter driver, had direct feedback to this, so I'm just gonna go straight into that. And they said to Xerxes, "All your questions raise good points. As for the biggest one, yes, clearly there is a fair deal of specialized knowledge that would have needed to exist when the silo was built and be documented in the original manuals for the first generations to continue surviving. Keeping in mind, we don't know the reason for the silo to have started, nor what the first population may have brought with them in skilled knowledge from their pre silo training. Some major inherently pre silo subjects would be mechanical engineering, power generation and climate regulation, and agriculture and animal husbandry. You need these to even build the damn thing and then keep it going. But if you're implying they shouldn't have this knowledge, if we are to believe all their books were burned and they have no clue how or why they got there, well, it's possible they're just mostly taught by direct observation on the job, and it's just how it's done, or the way it was taught to me and every doctor before, like being a shadow. Also, it's possible judicial selectively allowed some pre uprising training material to resurface as a legal relic after being stripped, rewritten, censored to limit curiosity and the potential for rebellion. It's also possible that some medical and technological advancements were introduced along the way, snuck into the training between generations, or discovered in one way or another, if you believe that there are external forces at play and thus contact with the outside. So, regardless, if some of their training materials are based on pre silo knowledge, I suspect whatever they are using to train specialists is highly redacted or disguised as relearned and possibly on a regular basis, so as to not create doubt and curiosity. Like editions of a textbook, it's totally plausible that the people in charge would have made changes to either add or delete information. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we see this happening we see similar things to that happening in the real world all the time. So we can see this kind of thing happening with school textbooks in the occupied parts of Ukraine right
Right,
now. So, because for my job I follow as many different Ukrainian social media accounts as I can. And like the
right,
textbook, not just the textbooks for obvious things like history or literature, but like science textbooks have been taken out of circulation and rewritten to give the credit
right.
to basically to give the credit to certain inventions to Russian inventors rather than Ukrainian ones, or even just to alter the way things are spelled, to alter them from being written in Ukrainian to being written in Russian.
I mean, even in the US, we see a lot of controversy right now over what's allowed to be in the
Yeah,
textbooks,
exactly.
what we're allowed to teach our children about history.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean that Reddit user I think has it pretty much spot on, but it is an interesting question. Like there must be an irreducible amount of knowledge that has carried over from the before times into the silo. And like Lucas doesn't know stars are called stars, but he knows
Right.
they're there. And he's worked out
That they
that they
move.
move
Yeah.
and that they move in a pattern.
Mhm.
So it's not like all curiosity about the outside world has been stamped out, even after at least
Right.
140 years.
Well, what does Gloria say in this episode? They can't breed the curiosity out of us.
No, but they seem to be trying really hard.
Right. Okay, Juicy Apple says, I think the choice of relics in Meadows' house is symbolic. Her playful spirit is behind glass. She seems to have much, but isn't actually free. I'm also not sure if she has a syndrome or is simply alcoholic. Well, yeah, we already addressed that. Lastly, when Holland tells Juliet he's afraid of Meadows' power, he could be lying and just trying to throw Juliet off. He could be implying the power of the janitors, watchers, etc., that people think are behind judicial, but maybe it's just a front and the actual power is behind him and they're good at hiding it. What do you think?
Oh, that's an interesting point about Bernard. I don't think Bernard knows what's going on.
No.
I think he is genuinely afraid of Judge Meadows. Then again, I think they've left enough sort of wiggle room in the plot that I'd be surprised if Bernard knew what was going on, but I wouldn't be absolutely stunned, and it wouldn't be like it wouldn't make any sense that he didn't know
Right.
what was going on.
Okay. I guess we shall see. Farius says, too bad Juliet didn't understand Holston's note sooner. Nice to see where the hard drive was. Looks like it's finally going to be some action going on in future episodes. This show appears to be setting up a power dynamic between Judicial and IT. What do you think, Luke? Have you been missing the action the last few episodes?
No, actually, and like I say, I agree that I think the last 3 episodes are going to kick up into a higher gear.
I agree.
But no, I've never thought of this as an action adventure series. I've always sort of thought of it as more sort of a character study and
Right.
an exercise in world building and sort of the politics and the mystery box element. I've never really thought of it as a series with a lot of action in it. I mean, there was episode 3, I guess, which is quite action packed. But other than that, it's been a much more philosophical show than an action packed show.
Well, it seems, yeah, the bits of action, episode 3 aside, seem to happen in small bursts, like Juliet hanging over the rail, Sims pushing Trumbull over, these sorts of things. Yeah. The fight with Marnes in his short-lived fighting ring of one. Yeah. Yeah. And White Paper Bag says, poor distraught Lucas. I think he was probably looking back on that scene with him and Jules like the rest of us and knowing how awkward it looked for everyone, crying emoji. And now we know this Lucas as well works for IT. They're drip feeding us Lucas content this season.
Yeah, they are. And I can imagine Lucas going back to his apartment and just crawling into bed and feeling profoundly the world is an unfair place, Lucas. The world is an unfair place.
This is definitely a sleeping with the blankets over your head
kind
of night.
It definitely is, yeah.
And yeah, White Paper Bag goes on. So, what are your thoughts, theories on Meadows and the extent of her knowledge and the extent of her sickness? I saw someone make mention that we've only ever seen her drink anything but water, and it was revealed by Gloria that the water is drugged in this last episode. Another reveal I wasn't expecting so early. I definitely think there's something behind those special beverages of hers. Jules even makes a point to call out her quote unquote cold medicine, which could just be alcohol as much as anything else. I think it'd be interesting if they used Meadows to show the effects of spiked water as a way to help ready the viewers for more Shift content, Shift being the second book. It seems like drip feeding small amounts of future material as how they're prepping the audience for later massive reveals or changes. What do you think?
Ooh, that's interesting. Because does that imply then that this program of drugging the water actually has made people in the silo more compliant?
Good question. Yeah.
And it is an interesting point that you've never seen Judge Meadows drink the water. You've never seen Sims drink the water either. I think the only thing you've seen Sims drink is that beer in Marnes's apartment. Although
sure.
presumably that was made with the water in the silo. So maybe the process of fermentation kills whatever they put in there. But
well, I mean, but that's what they used to do in medieval times in Europe, is that the water wasn't safe to drink, so they would just brew like low alcohol beer and drink that instead.
Yeah, because that's what they did in Europe, and in Asia they discovered tea.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, boil that shit.
Yeah, just boil it. Yes, that's interesting. I mean, you've probably got, without spoiling too much, you've probably got more to say on that as a book reader than I do as a non-book reader.
I mean, I think whatever White Paper Bag and I have to say about this, we will say in DMs until more is revealed. La Barouf says, I had been asking myself why she didn't understand why he wanted her to put more flowers. I wished she would have seen the camera and removed the mirror. Glad she found the hard drive. By the way, love the fact that they just touched the hard drive that looks like a really old SCSI one to read it. No ribbon. Laughing emoji. So the silo really is run by the janitors? Interesting twist. Yeah, so I don't know if Juliet understands how they're watching them through the mirrors. They did flash to the camcorder, but to me it seemed like she, when she's thinking about the mirrors, she thinks about the camcorders. But to me it seems like a giant leap since she doesn't really know what the camcorder's for yet.
No, I think what she's thinking of is the scanner outside the silo. The camera
Right,
they go to clean.
She does mention the sensors, yeah.
I think that's the leap she's making.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes more sense. Yeah, because I hope that, that camcorder is like Chekhov's camcorder right now. So I'm hoping that Martha's fixed it enough that they are going to find something to play on it. And, we're going to have some big reveal that way. Fingers crossed.
If ever we do merch, I demand we do a T-shirt with Chekhov's camcorder on
There you
it.
go. I'm
Yeah,
I'm in, I'm in. And yeah, and of course the, Juliet to Sims scale.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, we've talked about, did you think the janitors may be the top dogs, maybe not?
I just
Hard to say.
Yeah, there would. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but there's something in Common's performance this week that just leads me to believe he is not the top dog. There is for all the anger that Sims is directing towards those techs. There's fear behind it, I think. And also, if Sims was the top boss, why not just make himself mayor so that the two power structures of the silo align with
Right.
each other? Why bother having this elaborate charade of having Judge Meadows and a mayor and a sheriff? Why not just if
Because
Sims
the pact says
because
so.
the pact says so? So who wrote the pact? That's what I'm saying.
Hmm,
It just feels like it makes more sense for there to be somebody above Sims.
right, okay.
It doesn't quite make sense that he would be the big bad.
Okay. Yeah, so him, them, lesbian left a long bit of feedback saying they hope we see more of Walker's backstory soon. Me too. But also some other points and questions that we're going to tackle one by one. So they say, I wish it hadn't been another cliffhanger, which I don't know. I kind of like the cliffhangers, but what do you think?
No, it was a great cliffhanger as well,
Yeah.
actually, because like Juliet has got like maximum 30 seconds to get out of there before the jackbooted fascists come storming through that door. So I'm going to be really interested in just in terms of where she goes to hide. So
Yeah.
yeah, I actually thought it was a really well set up cliffhanger.
Yeah. Yeah, and they say, I want to know who all the secret raid team is. I assume some are janitors in the day today, and probably maintenance is the bulk of these people, since so many people have mentioned that not questioning them, and they're apparently so scary they can just go into people's apartments as they please. I guess they're just ready to deploy as the secret police whenever. How many janitors, maintenance peeps are in on it? And what percentage of judicial is in on this? It seems like a good amount of people are in the know here, as at least on a surface level, like the doctors. But with so many people as raiders, watchers, it must be a hard secret to keep completely. It's touching on kind of what you were saying. And
Yeah.
they say, I guess it's the middle of the night, but surely someone will have noticed some heavily armed, more heavily armed than normal, I assume, people busting into medical, especially since Jules could hear them coming. Unless Judicial does this sometimes, and that's why everyone is so scared of them.
I mean, I think even if this is the kind of thing they do sort of semi often, you still need to come up with
A cover
some
story.
kind of explanation, a cover
Mm,
story. Otherwise, the rumors that are going to start will just be too much to deal with.
mm,
Like, people are just not going to go around their daily lives and accept that this kind of thing randomly happens every so often. They're going to want some kind of explanation.
right. Okay. And they continue, I want to know if there's something on the camcorder or if it's just a way to let Jules know cameras exist, and why her mom was building a microscope, and why exactly strong magnification isn't allowed. Elevators make sense because people stay somewhat isolated and can't make groups like the Flamekeepers silo wide, but I don't understand the magnification. So, okay, I'll respond to that. Um, I'll just say that the magnification rule isn't called out in the books, but it makes sense in the context of that world. I think there are several reasons why they included this rule, one of which is that it prevents the advancement of technology. So in episode 5, when they're talking about this, Martha said the tiny circuitry in the camcorder is what makes it such a forbidden relic. If they can't magnify, they can't create intricate technology that small. But obviously, someone has created the computers they use, and IT maintains them. So I'm curious where the boundaries to this lie in the day to day life.
Yeah.
Does the rule apply to everyone equally in practice, or it seems like maybe not?
Yeah, and I mean the thing about the elevators, that's interesting as well. I hadn't thought of it from that point of view. But yes, I suppose it does make forming sort of silo wide groups. It doesn't make it impossible, but it makes it much more difficult,
Right.
much more time consuming, and
Right.
much more public, I would guess. So yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, and they go on, I hope we learn more about the syndrome. I feel like it's more than just a genetic sickness and is connected to the memory loss drug in the water. Maybe a sensitivity to it? Are they putting the drug in the water always or on an as needed basis? The Flamekeepers are probably recent enough to warrant the drug, but if Jules doesn't remember them, it must be mostly forgotten now. Unless people in the mids and up top were more aware of that stuff, And how well does it work when Gloria clearly remembers things very clearly when she's sedated? So two quick things about that. One is that I don't know that the Flamekeepers were like widely known. I would imagine that, the Watchers obviously were aware of them, but I don't know that random people in the silo were. So that's my one thought. And the other thought is that I noticed when I went back and was watching the episode again, I noticed that Gloria, she said that they put it in the water around the time of the rebellion, but she does not say whether or not they're still doing it now. So it's quite possible that that's not something they're doing now. So that's
No,
not.
but I like the idea of the syndrome being an allergic reaction to the drugs.
Yeah.
I think that that makes a lot of sense. And it's yes, she does say it was around the time of the rebellion, but you would need to keep doing it with every generation that came into the silo to keep the effect up.
Well, you just need to do it for there's the people who physically remember the rebellion, and then their children will only know what's told to them.
I suppose. But it's not just to kill memory. I took it was to sort of make people more compliant, more sort of not to like zombify people, but just to make them sort of generally compliant.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the making them generally compliant is again by like making them forget that they had anything to be upset about. That was how I took it.
Yeah, possibly. I think that's an open question as to whether they're still using the drugs. And I
Right.
think actually,
Yeah, that wasn't clear.
yeah, I think the syndrome as a side effect, as sort of an allergy to the drug. I really like that. We get such interesting feedback.
I know. Smart people.
Yeah.
So one more bit from the same person. I hope Jules tells Billings about all of this, and he ends up being on her side. I like him. I don't trust Bernard at all. I can't believe he can run IT and not be aware of the state of the art tech Sims has. And I also don't fully trust Lucas since he's IT, but he's curious, so maybe he'll be okay. He's definitely bold going in for a kiss already. I can't imagine how Jules will get out of this. She's gonna go hide out with a digger or something, unless they know about that too. Dot dot dot.
Yeah, I mean, going to hide out in the digger makes sense, but she's got a lot of ground to cover between medical and that digger. So yeah, as sort of a long term hiding place, that makes sense. But I don't know how she gets from A to B without being spotted,
Yeah,
because the digger is
the digger's way down, and there's only one pair of stairs. Yeah,
yeah, she's basically somewhere towards like the upper middle bit
yeah,
of the silo. So yeah, she'd have a long way to go to get from one place to the other.
yep. All right, switching over to Twitter. From We Are the No at Hinary. One theory that stuck out is that the year is somewhere near 3050 because that's the code Common put in the keypad for that secret room. Now I have to admit I didn't notice the code, but do you think there's anything to that code meaning something?
Who knows? I mean, like maybe I don't think we have enough information to
No.
even guess what time it is yet.
I'm definitely going to be looking out to see if this number 3050 pops up anywhere else.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It was a good catch. I didn't actually pay attention to that. Yeah. Quick editorial interjection. After some discussion on the wires from the Deep Discord, I went back and looked at this again, and it looks like Sims is either entering 3035 or 2035, probably 3035. So, okay, moving on. We also got Abby at SCEGFU_. She says, "Oh my God, so many new questions or old. Who is really pulling the strings and why?" Well, this is your question. The janitors are sinister AF, but is Sims really the big baddie? Would be too obvious, too easy. He might be in charge of the janitors, but seeing as he had to search the database for the dangerous Pez dispenser, seems he doesn't have all the answers either. The real string puller would. Flamekeepers concept. Love it. Lore keepers, storytellers, the very soul of humanity. Erase them, and all you are left with is robots. Yeah, Abby, I absolutely love what you said about storytellers. And yeah, Luke, I know that you definitely agree with the rest because,
Yeah, we've talked about that at length.
yeah. Next up is from Aaliyah at Hail Romanov on Twitter. So many questions. Does Judge Meadows work with Sims? That one tear she shed while she and Jules were talking about they, it looks like she's been through a lot, and I don't know which side she's on, good or bad. I love the stargazing scene, even though it was through a screen. Such a cute moment. Lucas does have a curious side to him. I wonder if he's going to get tangled in Jules's investigation later on, and if his crush on Jules is real or if he has other intentions.
Well, I mean, I think it was telling that this was the episode they revealed that Lucas works in IT, and the episode where Juliet finally gets her hand on the hard drive. I
Yeah.
mean, they did this much more artfully than what I'm about to describe. But it does remind me. Have you ever seen the Ron Howard adaptation of the Dan Brown novel Angels and Demons?
Yes, yes. I went through a Dan Brown phase.
Yeah, there's that great scene in that where like Ewan McGregor is talking to Tom Hanks, and he just out of nowhere blurts out that he knows how to fly a helicopter for
Right.
no reason at all, and it's like, I wonder if that's useful information that we will come back to later.
Yeah.
Now, I think, in fairness, the writers handled that much more
No,
subtly
definitely.
than Dan Brown did, but
Yeah, but it is curious because, the readers we've known the entire time. Well, we know in the books Lucas works for IT, but then people are like, "Well, does he not work for IT in the?" But then yeah, laying it out this specific episode is like, okay, well, we needed somebody techie back in the cast, so
yeah.
and yeah, so Silo TV fan says, I liked that they included the forgetting medicine already. I also thought it was good to show that Meadows is just a pawn as well. But I have a very singular reader frustration at the moment. It's been 7 episodes of really good TV, and I'm still no closer to figuring out how the responsibilities are divided between IT and judicial. And also, they could and should, in my opinion, have included more of the book. The pace is officially too slow for me. Um, yeah, I did notice a lot of readers especially struggled with this episode, seemingly much more than non-readers. Do you think there's a divide?
I think the best sort of example I've encountered of this is watching Game of Thrones, having read the books, and like the first series of Game of Thrones, pretty much beat for beat sticks to Game of Thrones, the book. But what you end up with is you end up over the course of the series, they make small changes in one season that lead to bigger changes in other seasons, because once you've made that one small change, it's kind of like throwing a pebble in a pond. The
Right.
ripples go out from there. So no, I mean, I didn't have a problem with this episode, but I can get how, sort of, from a book reader's point of view, those small changes can have big consequences
Yeah, I mean,
down the line.
I think the biggest part is probably that just like we're so excited to see certain things happen, and it's just taking longer to get there because they're building out sideways more. So I think that's where some readers are feeling the frustration. It's just like, just show me the cool bits that I know are coming.
But also, I would say to Silo TV fans, given what we've learned of in this episode, does it really matter what the relationship between judicial and IT is? Because these organizations clearly aren't the people running the show anyway. They're the monkeys, not the organ grinders.
Okay, so you think it's neither of them is in charge. But who do you okay, so you think there's like a secret power, another secret power within the silo?
No, I'm still going with the theory that this is some massive experiment,
Okay.
and that Sims is like maybe the junior researcher. He's like the
Okay.
doctoral.
The man on the scene.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like the doctoral student in this
Okay.
experiment.
Okay. 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 And next up we have Junaid Badar at Junaid Badar 20. And he said, didn't like the name Flamekeepers, to be honest. I don't have any issue with this term. It's nice, but it just didn't feel right for this show. I don't know. Something like Truth Seekers would have been a better name. There were Flamekeepia in the 100 too, spiritual advisor to the leader and guardians of the Flame AI. Just my personal opinion. And I have to say, yeah, a lot of people have brought up the overlap with the 100 in terms of using that term. But I think for my own reasons, as we've discussed before, that maybe this is just like this keepers of the fire, flame keepers. This is just a concept in humanity that we've passed down for generations, and that's why it keeps popping up.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder Hugh Howey whether he knows anything about the Potawatomi and Native American law,
I'm
or
going.
whether he
I'm,
actually took the concept straight from that.
I'm going to guess no, but we can certainly ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Junaid continues. So Holston knew about the cameras, but what about Sims and Co? Did they know that Holston knew about it? Did they try to stop Holston? Also, Lucas and Juliet is a big no from me. No chemistry. I'm ignoring the last part, throwing it away.
Listeners, it's a good job you can't see the expression on Alicia's face right now.
I sucked a hard lemon, yeah.
She sucked a hard lemon.
Very sour lemon.
So yeah, leaving Juliet and Lucas to one side because I want my co-host to keep speaking to me. Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions. Like I said earlier on, it's just how far did Halston get,
and how much did they know about?
And how much do they know about how
what
far
he might have known? Yeah.
got? I think it's clear that Halston went outside because he thought Allison was still alive and he wanted to be with her. But I also wonder, was another factor in that he would rather take his fate into his own hands and sort of see what was out there than wait for the janitors to catch up with him, maybe?
Right. Okay. So we have from Stu at Duve71. Ooh, did they just put stuff in the water to get quote unquote certain people to forget the rebellion is a smokescreen cover story? How many are there in janitorial? Is Sims the puppet master or just a puppet himself? This is a very common question. So many questions, but love how this show sets up the questions, but is equally quick to answer them. Loved how Judge Meadows has been set up as all powerful, but she's just the front for Sims. I think Luke called this out in the last pod. What's going on with Bernard? Arg, I need all the answers now for this season. And he adds, my wife commented early in episode 7, what's with the consistent use of the Fibonacci spiral, the spiral staircase, the emblem of the silo, and the ammonite? Is it relevant to the story or just a theme? And yeah, as far as the Fibonacci spiral, also known as the golden spiral, it's basically like a very mathematically satisfying spiral that turns up a lot in nature. So, for example, yeah, the shell fossil follows that pattern. And it is something we've seen come up again and again in imagery for the show. So, along with like the mechanical motifs, biological motifs, including the DNA helixes. Luke, do you have any thoughts about how these things work?
I mean, I don't really have any thoughts about the Fibonacci spiral. Yeah, I mean, I do sort of wonder whether that symbolism is trying to convey like a message to the audience, or whether it's trying to convey a message to the citizens of the silo. To come back on my own, I had kind of worked out that Sims was sort of shadowing Judge Meadows, but I hadn't worked out that she was completely powerless. So I don't want to claim more credit than, yeah.
Okay.
Also, just to go back to the payoff thing, I love the fact that within like a minute of the episode starting, it had paid off that Sims was the guy they were going to wake up last episode.
Right.
Like, I think a worse written show could have dragged that out for episodes and episodes if they wanted to. I think it's so much more effective that they just said, yeah, this mystery's solved, it's Sims, move on, this is not what we're interested in.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a real strength of the writing that they're not afraid to set mysteries up and pay them off relatively quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also found interesting in what Stu said that he seems to think that it's possible that the forget juice in the water was actually to make people forget that the rebellion didn't happen. He calls the rebellion a smokescreen cover story. But you said that you're feeling like this, as of this week, you're feeling extra confident that it probably did happen.
I think Gloria gave us a rationale as to why a rebellion would happen. That there were basically two schools of thought about how you handle the memory of the outside world. And I can see both sides of that argument. I can see why you'd want to preserve it in terms of preserving, history and where humanity came from and culture. But I can also see, if you are trapped in the silo, why torture people with the memory of a world that they can no longer access?
Right.
Why tempt people to want to go outside?
Right. All right. Geek in Review at the Geeks Reviews says, just seen this week's very fast-paced ep. Does Bernard have a noticeable alcohol stress issue in the book? The guy looks worse every week. And so, yeah, the Bernard drinking thing seems to be new for the show. And it's interesting that we now have two characters who potentially have an alcohol problem. Though in this world, I would imagine there'd be a lot more.
Yeah, but thank you for somebody else picking that up, because I definitely said, I think last week, that Bernard in both of those meetings in episode 6 was buzzed. And yeah, he's definitely, I don't know whether he's ill in this episode or whether he's just stressed, but yeah, there's something in that meeting with Jules that tells me something is badly off with Bernard. Not to the same extent as Judge Meadows, but just, yeah, there's something not right with Bernard at the moment, like physically not right with him.
Okay, yeah, no, you guys are being more observant on that front than I am. I did notice, like, we haven't seen him drink in a little while.
That's true. Maybe he got to the bottom of
Yeah,
John's stash. Maybe it's all gone.
maybe that's why he's stressed.
Yeah.
Okay, so switching over to Discord, and for anyone new to the podcast, we are part of the Lorehounds Discord. There's a link in the show notes, and we have a special Silo channel there, so you can hop in there anytime and give us your thoughts about the show, or just talk with other show fans. And there's also, you can talk about other shows on the server, like Ted Lasso and Barry, and a bunch of other things. So from the Discord, skip_intro says, "Hi, I'm new on this server and I wanted to say how much I'm loving the show and also the podcast will shift dust as well. I have a quick question regarding dates in the show. Do we have a current year that it's set in? I saw Silo year 87 on the hard drive when I paused it, but I also got a screenshot of Allison and Holston's flat with a blanket on the wall with the date May 5th, 26. Did they start measuring years again after the rebellion?" Oh, and they put the rebellion in quotes. Thanks. So yeah, during the premiere episode, we saw Mayor Johns give the Freedom Day speech, and she said that the rebellion took place 6 minutes, 6 seconds past 6 o'clock on this day 140 years ago, which means 3 years before the current timeline of the show. So yeah, we're 143 years post rebellion now, and I definitely think, yes, that they restarted the dates with the rebellion being year zero. So that would mean that Holston and Allison had been married for about 14 years when she went out to clean, which is sad, but timeline wise, it works out.
Yeah. But of course, what we don't know is what year it is in relation to the real world, if you see what I mean. So
Yeah.
there's the comment a moment ago that it might be the year 3050.
Yeah.
It could well be. We have absolutely no idea.
Right. Yeah, but for their internal date measurements, it does seem like they reset to zero with the rebellion, which makes sense.
Yeah.
And Scribe Jack says, episode 7, I think the picture book basically confirms that they've been in the silo less than 150 years. Otherwise, the pages would be crumbling. Plus, these new drugs they've introduced that can make people forget, inhabit the silo, make up the rebellion and drug, gaslight everyone until everyone believes they've been there forever. Why? To lower mortality rates, maybe? If you're born in a place and think that's the way it's always been, you're more likely to be content? Question mark.
Yeah, I agree with the point about the storybook. And the reason I say that is for work, I have to deal with a lot of old documents. I have to go into archives quite a bit. And paper and ink degrade remarkably quickly. So if you are handling documents from, say, immediately after World War II, which I've done, so
Right.
from the late 40s to the early 1950s, so just sort of 60, 70 years ago, you need to handle those documents incredibly carefully. And a lot of the time, admittedly, this is like they've been typed on a typewriter, but a lot of the time they're not particularly legible.
Maybe it's better paper than.
Yeah, maybe it's better paper, maybe. But yeah, again, this is probably grossly overthinking it, but yeah, I don't think that book is 150 years old. I don't think it would be in that good a condition.
Okay. I'm going to go with that. I think it's convenient for it to, I don't know, but, or maybe there's better paper.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, well preserved. It doesn't seem like Juliet's being careful. She's not wearing gloves when she handles it or anything.
No,
she wouldn't know to. She wouldn't know to.
I've got to say, my archivist brain went, use gloves.
Yeah.
And also, you should be putting that on a rest. You shouldn't be holding it like that.
Yeah. Okay, so Rebecca Fan says episode 7 equals Rebecca's best episode since Machines. She explored so many more emotions, especially Jules's vulnerability in a few scenes, being chewed out by Billings, coming to terms with who George really was, dealing with her dad, etc. Maybe Allison's doctor was in on the birth control scam, but likely didn't know the whole truth. That makes sense now. I wondered why Sims didn't nab Jules as soon as he saw the book. Maybe he wanted to see where she went with it. Too bad Bert and Ernie lost her. Sort of afraid for Juliet now. It seems she's in more immediate danger. Are you worried for Juliet?
Like I say, I would be worried for
Yeah,
Juliet were it not for the fact that Rebecca Ferguson is a producer of this show. Um,
that's fair.
like I say, I think my main worry is Dr. Nichols and possibly Gloria, but I think if anybody is going to survive this season, it's going to be Juliet.
Fair.
If they really wanted a plot twist that would knock my socks off, then yeah, Juliet being sent out to clean would be that plot twist.
Okay. All right. Sherry says, just watched episode 7. Feel like we're going 100 miles per hour now with the reveals. So the camcorder is not a relic, but what are they using to record people behind the mirror, right? And Juliet just says, screw it, and lets them know that she knows by covering the mirror. But do you know why she killed herself? Gloria asked. It seemed it didn't just have to do with Juliet's brother's death, or that there was something more to it. Looks like we're going to find out all about Hannah next episode. Can't wait. And yeah, I would still call the camcorder a relic, and I still think it's gonna come into play where we're gonna find out there's either something on there, or we're gonna find, like, maybe there is film canisters in, janitorial that we're gonna get to play.
Chekhov's camcorder.
Yeah, Chekhov's camcorder. Although, I have to say the film canisters, they looked more like a projector setup, not like a camcorder, which would have, like, one of those little tapes,
Yeah,
I think.
that would be very lost. That would be if they had
Yeah.
to lace a projector.
Yeah. Rocky Zim says, excellent episode. I had a feeling Meadows was more of a puppet than actually in charge. So many reveals and still more questions. I know they said it has been 140 years or so since the rebellion, but had a thought. What if it was not that long ago? Like maybe Gloria was on the outside at one time. Her dream may be a memory of the ocean. Like maybe they have had some people in for a long time who may have been outside before, and then they started erasing memories and getting rid of rebels. Interesting how they can't get more cameras and have to switch out and replace some. That makes me think they are isolated from the outside world or wherever they are, because you think that they could get new ones if there was a system outside managing the silo. What do you think?
Yeah, now that is an interesting point, and that really does cut against my idea that it's all a massive experiment. Because yeah, you wouldn't need to move the cameras around; you'd just get new ones. So yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think what Gloria was experiencing was a memory. I think it was pure imagination.
Yeah, I agree.
Like if they were swapping people in and out of the silo, I think I would need. I'm not saying it couldn't happen because I'm not saying anything couldn't happen at this point. But I'd need to see a lot more evidence that that was happening before I sort of went with
Right.
that as a theory.
Okay. And for our final piece of feedback, Davey Mack says, I just got to say, I like it in stories when even the people in power have to deal with limitations, like not being able to have cameras everywhere and having to pick and choose where they surveil. Makes it more interesting and believable than if they just could see everything.
Yeah,
I agree.
that's a really good point.
All right. Well, that's it for the feedback channel this week. If you'd like your feedback discussed on the next episode breakdown, I'll pin a tweet to my Twitter profile and post on the Silo series subreddit to collect feedback as soon as the episode goes live. And of course, you can always find me on the Lorehounds Discord. Please get your feedback to us by Saturday to be included in next week's recording. So, Luke, final thoughts on the Flamekeepers?
Really enjoyed the episode. Think it set up a whole hell of a lot of questions for the last 3 episodes. People have talked about the pacing. I think we're going to be racing for the finish line now.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see what happens next.
Yeah. And so, as we discussed before, the next episode is called Hannah, Juliet's mother's name. And the official Apple TV summary reads, new information causes Juliet to see her family's past differently. And she finally gains access to the silo's biggest secrets. Now, we've talked a lot about the family angle, but what do you think are the silo's biggest secrets she's going to get access to?
She might well find out more about the janitors, who they are, and hopefully I'd like to see some sort of confrontation between Juliet and Sims. Whether that happens next episode or whether we have to wait for episode 10 for that to happen. I'd like to see Juliet and Sims have a no bullshit conversation about what's going on.
I have to agree with that. I love in shows in general when people just like have those no bullshit conversations, as you said. Like everyone just lay your cards on the table. Can we all just properly communicate?
Yeah.
Well, that's it for this week. We'll Shift Dust is a member of the Lorehounds Network, publishers of this podcast, a channel full of content just like this, talking about other books and shows like the works of Tolkien and Ted Lasso. Check out our new MC Universe Across the Spider-Verse review episode that just dropped on the Lorehounds feed with David, Jean, and I, or start with our preview episode that is online as well. And look out for more episodes with the guys and guests coming soon about Jedi Fallen Order, One Piece, and more. And as for Wool Shift Dust, Luke and I will be back around the same time next week. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you listen, and it'll pop right up in your feed when it's ready. 5-star ratings also really help us, as does telling your friends. Now, Luke, where can people find you?
They can find me at Luke Middup on Twitter. And I also do like a live first reaction to the show on Friday afternoons UK time, because myself and Elysia, we obviously watch the show multiple times before we record. So if you want my initial unfiltered thoughts, come along to the Discord on Friday afternoons UK time.
Okay. And you can find me at Elysia CB, and both those Twitter handles are spelled out in the show notes. And we'll be seeing you next week. Until then, you'll find us in the Down Deep with Martha Walker investigating Chekhov's camcorder.
So want that t-shirt.
Hey there, still there? It didn't feel right to leave this podcast without giving you at least one reading related to this episode, so I came up with something that fits. I've seen a lot of discussion online about Juliet's characterization in the show and how she seems maybe a bit rougher. Any regular listeners will know that I definitely objected to her punching her shadow in the face in episode 3, but overall, I do think that we're seeing the Juliet from the book. And I have a passage here that shows that. Now, this passage, it refers to the character Scotty, who I've mentioned before. He is a book character who didn't make it to the show, and he worked in IT, and he helped Jules decode the book version of the hard drive. So at this point, just to set this up, she has just received a message from him. You know, he's been helping her decode this, and he says, "Come immediately." And so she goes tearing down the stairs to the IT department. And when she arrives, she's greeted by someone at the desk. "Can I help you?" a young man in silver coveralls asked from behind the gates. She approached. "Sheriff Nichols," she said. She waved her ID at him, then passed it under the gate's laser scanner. The light turned red, and the gate let out an angry buzz. It did not open. "I'm here to see Scotty, one of your techs." She tried the card again, with the same result. "Do you have an appointment?" the man asked. Juliet narrowed her eyes at the man. "I'm the sheriff. Since when do I need appointments?" Again with the card, and again the gate buzzed at her. The young man did not move to help. "Please do not do that," he said. "Look, son, I'm in the middle of an investigation here, and you're impeding my progress." He smiled at her. "I'm sure you're familiar with the unique position we maintain here, and that your powers are—" Juliet put her ID away and reached over the gate to grab the straps of his coveralls with both hands. She pulled him almost clear over the gates, her arms bulging with the sinewy muscles that had freed countless bolts. "Listen here, you blasted runt. I'm coming through these gates, or I'm coming over them, and then through you. I'll have you know that I report directly to Bernard Holland, acting mayor, and your goddamn boss. Do I make myself clear?" The kid's eyes were wide and all pupil. He jerked his chin up and down. "Then move it," she said, letting go of his coveralls with a shove. He fumbled for his ID, swiped it through the scanner.